Fast. Super fast. Lightning fast. Welcome to Supercharged Search with Typesense. Hey there, I'm Jeffrey. All right, so before we get started, bear with me. I have a quick 30-second story for you, and don't skip over it. Okay, so when I was younger and I was learning how to perform advanced search, I would review certain unnamed tools, and I would come away feeling like, I'm too dumb for this tool. I don't know, can you relate? I would read the documentation and think, wow, that didn't help me at all. I actually had no clue whatsoever where to begin. And so yeah, as a result, I just wouldn't use the tool at all. And I think if Typesense had been available back then, I sure could have avoided so many headaches and so much confusion. Okay, because you know what? If there's one thing I can say about Typesense, and actually there's many things I could say, but if I had to distill it down to one thing only, I would say that Typesense makes me feel not dumb. And trust me, that is high, high praise. Okay, so I have prepared 22 episodes of Typesense goodness for you. We start at the beginning and we work our way all the way to the top. So you're going to learn about basic queries and setup and filters and sorting and ranking and semantic search and vector queries and Typesense Cloud. There's so much to cover, and I really do hope you're excited. So let's get started. All right, let's get started. I hope you're excited. So we're going to start by, of course, installing Typesense. I'll click on Guide and Install. Now, of course, depending upon your OS, you will install this in a different way. And of course, if you're following along with a course like this, you already know what you need to do here. So option 1 is Typesense Cloud, which is sort of their turnkey service that you should take a look at. We will review that later in the course. So for now, we will install it locally on our machine. And yeah, if you prefer Docker, here you go. If you want to use Mac with Homebrew or the binary or Linux or Windows, just find the one you like and you'll get started. So I'm on a Mac and I actually like to keep it simple. I'm going to use Homebrew here. So these are our commands. We want to install Typesense server and then we will start the service so that it's always available to us. All right, let's get going. I'll switch to my terminal, paste that in, and give it just a minute to do its thing. All right, so of course, I already have Typesense installed on my machine, but on your end, you'll see something along the lines of binding to port 8108, which, of course, is the port that you will connect to from your Laravel app in the future. All right, so now I just want to verify that everything is up and running. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to make a curl request to localhost, and like we discussed, 8108 is what it binds to. And we'll go to the health endpoint, and sure enough, I get OK true, or all set to go. All right, let's get started. I'm excited. So we're going to create a generic Laravel app, and I'm just going to call it, Supercharged Search. All right, no starter kit. It's going to be pretty bare bones Laravel. SQLite is fine. We can install our dependencies. Very good. So now we can view this in the browser. We have our basic Laravel splash page. Great. Next, let's cd in there and open this in my editor. All right, so now, while we're thinking of it, let's open up our environment file and set some initial values. So I will scroll down to the bottom, and yeah, we know that our Typesense host is localhost, right? And the port is 8108. So let's do this. Typesense host equals, of course, localhost, and Typesense port is 8108. And then also, we're going to need an API key, right? So let's do API key equals, and what should this be locally? Well, if we switch back to the documentation, let's scroll back to my Homebrew installation method. And yeah, right here, you'll see the default API key is XYZ, and again, the port is 8108. Okay, so let's set that here, XYZ. All right, so now if we need to reference any of these values in our project, and hint, we are going to. Now we have those available to us. Very cool. Okay, so the next step is to set up our PHP client. So once again, back to Arc. Let's go into install a client. And of course, they have client libraries for PHP. So let's take a look at that. All right, so let's scroll down and let's copy the composer require. I will paste that in. All right, and believe it or not, we're all set to go. So yeah, think about what we did in this video. We installed Typesense Server. We started it. We verified that it was up and running by making that curl request, right? Then we set up a fresh Laravel app and we assigned some initial Typesense-specific environment variables. And then finally, we finished up by pulling in the Typesense PHP client that we're going to make use of in the next episode. I'll see you then. All right, so now that we have Typesense fully installed and ready to go, of course, the next step is to perform a search. So let's get going. First, we need some kind of data set, right? So here's what we'll do. Let's return to the Typesense documentation and down to building a search application. And yeah, you'll see they have a huge books database that's going to be perfect for our needs. So we will pull that in, and then later, we're going to work with something a little more custom. All right, so notice it goes to your temp directory and it downloads this books file and unzips it. All right, so let's copy that, paste it in. All right, and yeah, now we have this books.jsonl file. So if I were to cat that, it is really big, but you can see it is a massive collection of books that consist of a title and authors and ratings and everything that we might want to search or filter upon. All right, so why don't we do this? Let's move it out of my temp directory into my code/supercharged search directory. All right, so now if I switch back to PHP Storm, and yep, here's our massive books database, so to speak. We're all set. All right, so now let's go into our routes file, and this is a good place to play around and connect to our client. All right, let's get going. So the first step is to create a new client, and make sure you pull in the right one. We want Typesense client. All right, and next we need our configuration. For example, the API key, what is the host? And you'll remember in the last episode, we assigned those to environment variables that you see here. So as you may know in Laravel, it's bad form to access the environment variables directly. Instead, we should go through our config. So let's put this within services. And then if I scroll down, I can place it right here. So we're going to have Typesense. And yeah, I'm just going to reference everything we created. For example, API key will be in the environment Typesense API key. All right, next, the host, and the same thing, Typesense host. And then finally, port, right, will be environment Typesense port. Okay, so now we can safely reference those values. All right, back to our routes file. All right, so now we can get going. Let's declare the API key. And yeah, we're gonna look in config, in the services file, the key is Typesense, and we want API key. And you know what? Already I can tell we have inconsistent naming here. It's fine, but I'm going to get tripped up. So I'm just going to normalize that, and we will use snake case. That's fine. Okay, so let's switch back, paste that in. And next we can set up our nodes, and this will be, what's our connection? Localhost, what's the port? What's the protocol? So let's do this. The host is going to be config services.typesense.host. The port will be services.typesense.port. And let's also do the protocol, HTTP, HTTPS. So why don't we make that configurable by returning to our services file, and we'll add another one here for protocol. Yeah, so the entire point of all of this is so that we can easily swap out these values in a local environment versus staging or production. So in my environment file, I will paste this in, Typesense protocol, and we'll set that to HTTP. That looks good. All right, back to our routes file. This is looking pretty good. The last thing I want to do is set up the connection timeout. So this is what you think it is. How long before we can't connect? Let's set it to 2, and of course, that can be configurable if you want, but I think it's okay for now. And yeah, we have our client. So let's do this. Before we do anything else, let's die and dump this object and see what we're working with. So I'll die and dump the client, and then I'm going to access our project's home page in the browser. All right, and sure enough, we have an instance of our Typesense client. And yeah, we can see it consists of a lot of things. We have the config, we have collections, which you can sort of think of as tables. We have aliases and keys. Don't worry about this right now. The important thing is we're up and running. Okay. All right, so I have two definitions that I want you to memorize. First up is document. So in the context of Typesense, a document you can sort of think of as a table row or a JSON object, right? So for a book, that object might consist of the author of the book, the title of the book, the release year, things like that. So that collection there, that object, in Typesense, you can think of as a document. All right, and now your next definition is collection. So once again, in the context of Typesense, a collection is sort of like a table. It's synonymous with a database table. A table consists of rows. A collection consists of documents. If you want, it's sort of a one-to-one link there, and that will really help you understand it. Okay, collection, table, document, table row. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's create our schema. Let's create a collection. We are working with books, so I'm going to call it book schema. Okay, so this is standard Typesense syntax here. We need to give it a name. What is the name of your collection, or what is the name of your table? We'll just call it books. That's fine. Next, what are the fields? Again, think of it like your data. Use all of your database knowledge here. What are the fields in this table or in this collection? Well, what are the things that I want Typesense to know about here? Maybe the title, maybe the author, maybe the publication year. That would be fine. When did it come out? Maybe the ratings count, maybe even things custom, like the average rating. Yeah, we can dynamically determine these values and sync them up. And I'll show you a number of ways you can do that in your own projects. But yeah, things like this are probably what you would want. And if we switch back to our books database here, we can quickly see we have title, we have author, we have publication year, we have average rating. Yeah, we're only going to include things that would make sense to sync up with Typesense. All right, things that we might want to search or filter upon. Okay, so let's get going. Our first field has a name of title, and we need to give it the type. Well, a title is of type string. There we go, done. Next, author. Well, if you think about it, a book can be written by more than one author. So in this case, the type is string, but it's really sort of like an array of strings. That's one way to think of it. So here's what we can do. Use this common syntax here. All right, so now it can be one or many strings. Cool. Next, publication year. So here, it's not going to be a string. It's going to be effectively a number, right? So we're going to set the type to int and 32-bit. All right. Next, the ratings count. This also will be int 32. And by the way, there's also int 64, which you might want to use for timestamps and things like that. There's not many types, so don't worry about this. Okay, and then finally, we're going to have average rating. So let's update this one. And yeah, if you want, you could use int 32. You can even use a float, which might make sense. And yeah, this is basically our book table schema. That's a way to think of it. Okay, so now I want to decide what is our default sorting order. And here's what I mean. If I search these books and we have multiple books that match your search query. For example, if I search for HAR, well, I'm immediately thinking Harry Potter there, right? But maybe there's another book that also begins with HAR, maybe the Harry Truman biography or something like that, right? So in those situations, like how do we determine the correct sorting order? What is the importance level? What is the logic that determines when one might come before the other? And yeah, this just depends on your application. So in our case, we might want to say, well, the number of ratings is most important, or even the average rating. So the book that has a much higher rating should naturally come before one that has a horrible rating, right? It's probably not as good and not as likely to be the thing that you're searching for. So yeah, it just depends on your collection and how you want to organize things. I'll give you an example for Laracasts. When we have courses that you search on, well, how would you want the default sorting order to be for a programming course? Well, it could be the number of comments in the course. It could be the release year. It could be the number of views the course has received, right? And these are all things that factor into the equation. For example, what if a really old Laravel course has so many more views than a new one? Well, it's still not the one that I want to show up first, right? Because it's so old and outdated. So often you will want to take multiple things into account. You want to consider the release year, but maybe also the number of videos, the number of comments, the number of views. And there are ways to assign weights to each of these components. And I'll show you that later in the course. Okay, so anyways, for now, I'm going to set the default sorting order. And by the way, it's default because you can override it if you need to as part of your search query. But by default, we're going to sort these by the ratings count. And I think that's fine. And whoops, I'm sorry, not default sorting order, default sorting field. What is the field that is our default for sorting? Okay, this is looking good. So now that we've effectively defined the schema for a collection, let's go ahead and create it. And here's how. We already have our client object up here. So we'll say client collections, and we're going to create a new one. Nice and readable. Let's pass through our book schema. Finally, I will return done. And yeah, let's give this a run by opening the browser. So we give this a run and we get done. I think we're all set to go here. So let's inspect this. Let's do a quick curl request to ensure that we do have a books collection up and running. And yeah, I'm just going to paste this in because it's a little bit wordy, but very quickly, we're going to perform a curl request. I'm going to set the request type to get. We're going to once again hit that localhost port 8108 that we bind to. And then specifically, I want the collection/books endpoint. Again, books corresponds to our collection name. So we're going to make that request, but of course, to authenticate or authorize that request, we need to send through our API key. So we do that here as a header. So if we give that a run, sure enough, we can see all of the schema that we defined. But yeah, if we were to try something else like courses, well, that doesn't exist, so we get not found. We're up and running here. And yeah, if you want, you could even save this to a little alias if you want a quick sanity check to make sure everything was configured properly. All right, so now that we've defined the schema for our first collection and we've created it, the final step for this video is, of course, to import our books, and then we'll be all set to go. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to keep everything you see here just so you can review it in the source code. But yeah, of course, if I were to hit this endpoint again, we would see an error because we've already created the books collection, and we don't have to do that again, of course. You would only do this once. All right, so now right down here, here's what I want to do. I basically want to fetch this file and then import it into Typesense. So here's how. Let's say file, good old file get contents. I'm going to look in our project base path, and it's called books.jsonl. All right, so that's our data. We'll save that to books. If we die and dump books, you'll see a massive collection here. That's what we want. All right, now I can say in our client, go into your collections, and specifically we want the one for books, right? The one we just created. So grab that collection. All right, and now I effectively want to import a bunch of documents, right? And remember, a document is a synonym for a table row. It's just Typesense speak for a table row. So let's say for the documents, let's import all of these books. And then we'll say books imported. All right, so back to the browser, refresh, and sure enough, we get books imported. And that's a wrap for episode 3. Okay, so now we've made a little more progress, right? You've learned about collections. You've learned about documents. You've learned how to import a mass of data. In the next episode, we're going to query against that data. Now, before we perform our first search, why don't we do just a little bit of organization, mostly to make it as easy as possible for you to copy and paste whatever you need. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to copy this route, and I'm going to rename it to, well, what did we do here? We created a collection, so I will call it create collection. Now keep in mind, these are not endpoints you actually want in your app. We're just using this as a playground. If you wanted to configure these as artisan commands, that would be fine as well. They're not intended to keep, just to play around. Okay, so now if I paste in the next one, I will call this one import collection. And each one will be like a self-contained snippet for how to perform an action. So for example, at the top, to create a collection, here's what we need. We'll say collection created. All right, next, to import a collection. Once again, we are duplicating here, but that's okay. We already have our schema and we've already imported it. So all we would have to do is get the database, get the collection, and then we would defer to books and import them like so. All right, so now we're gonna do a third one, and this is going to be our playground for searching a collection. All right, so here's what we do. We have our client. We've already imported these, so I can get rid of it. And let's get going. We'll say client, collections, books is the name of our collection. And I'm gonna search through our documents or search through our table rows. So documents, search. All right, what is the query? Well, let's start by hard coding it. And then of course later, we will make that available through the query string. So yeah, maybe we can search for a book I like is called Dark Matter. So let's start by looking for dark as our query. All right, this will give us our results. And why don't we die and dump the results and have a look in the browser. So take note of this endpoint. Switch back, go to search collection, and we get no search fields specified for the query. So here's what's going on. It's saying, hey, you're trying to query against this collection, but you didn't tell me what we're looking in. Are we looking through the title? Are we looking through the author? We need to be explicit about that, right? So let's switch back and add our search fields. Query by, and we're just gonna look at the title for now. That's the only thing I want factored into the equation. All right, so let's see. Oh, this is interesting. 0 found and 0 hits. That's not right. So here's what I'm thinking. Maybe we made a mistake importing our data. So here's what we can do. Let's once again run that command to check our books collection. And yeah, this shows all of the schema like the name, author, title, publication year. But at the very bottom, we should also see, aha, here it is. So yeah, at the bottom, it shows the number of documents that are available here, and it's set to 0, even though we performed that import. So here's what I'm thinking. We probably have some glitch related to our schema. So let's scroll up to where we import the collection. So API key, this looks good. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it must be something related to the import. So here's what we can do. We can return the response, and this will show us for each document if it was successful, if there was an error. So here's what I'll do. Let's run this route again, but then die and dump the response, and it'll tell us if we misconfigured something. Import collection. And aha, we found it. We should have checked for this. So yeah, we can see we have a 400 because the author has been declared in the schema, but it wasn't found in the document. So it's really important that we sync these up. So of course, in this case, I know exactly what the problem was. When we defined the schema right up here, I used the name author, but of course, because it is potentially an array, the actual schema key is authors. And we can verify this by looking in the books database. And we can see, yep, it was set to authors. So this was my mistake, but you know what? I'm going to keep it in the course because, well, it's just a great example of how you can go about debugging some of these things that you might run into in your own projects. Okay, very cool. So let's do this. Let's re-import this. And here's what I can do. Because we have this handy dandy playground route, what I will do is at the very start, before I run this, I'm going to say for the books collection, just delete it. We're going to start entirely from scratch. So delete the existing books collection and then build up a new one. Okay. Switch back. Let's go to create collection. There we go. Next, I will import the collection. Yep, lots of success trues. So if I go back to the command line and we run this again, you'll see that now we have almost 10,000 documents, and this is what we want. Okay, so now, sorry about that. So now if we swap back down to the very bottom, we can try this out. So right down here, let's get rid of that. Let's search the collection. We search for dark, and this time, let's see what we get. All right, now we get 134 results. Let's have a look at the hits. So what is the topmost hit? Let's see. We have our document, which again, I'm just drilling this into you. Think of it like a table row in your head. And sure enough, we can see the top result is a book called Dead Until Dark, and the author is Charlaine Harris. Let's just keep going. Let's look at one more. We can see this one's called Dark Places. Now, here's a cool thing that Typesense offers. You'll see a highlight section. So this is exactly what you think it is. It will show us the title, but it will highlight the relevant part that matches your search query. So you'll see if I go into highlight for title, here is our snippet. So notice we have the same title, but it wraps the part that matches your query within mark tags. And then when you display your results, you can highlight it, set a yellow background. You've seen things like that a million times, right? So if I were to change this to DAR, and if we come back and refresh, now, of course, only the DAR portion will be highlighted, as you can see right here. Very cool. All right, so now let's do this. Let's swap out this hard-coded query with something that comes from the request. So I'll say, look in the query string for Q. And of course, you probably want to validate this as well, but we're going to skip over that just in the playground phase of our learning. Okay, so now, for example, if I were to search for Q equals Harry, well, I would imagine that Harry Potter is going to be the top result. Let's see. Open up the document, and sure enough, we get Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Very cool. But now here's something to consider. If I instead search for Rowling, the writer of Harry Potter, and if we give this a run, well, we get just one result. And you know what? I bet it's not what we expect. We take a look, and sure enough, we get the Howling. And this is actually an interesting little note here. It matched Howling because it's assuming that possibly we have a typo here. So Typesense will take that into account. Even if maybe you have a mistake here or there, it's smart enough to figure out what you possibly meant. Now, in this case, I searched for Rowling, and maybe I would still expect Harry Potter to show up, but it doesn't in this case. And if we switch back, we can see why, right? We are querying by the title. We didn't say query by the author. We said, no, the only thing I want you to use here is the title of the book, not the authors. So here's what I could do. I could do a comma-separated list here, and now I can say, yeah, look in the title, but also look in that array of authors. So if I come back and we give this another run, this time we have many more results. Go to the very top, go into the document, and yet once again, now, even though I'm searching for Rowling, it matched it. And of course, that's the most popular book in the world, so it brings that up as the #1 result. Check the author, and we have J.K. Rowling, and I don't know, this is maybe like the translation for this edition. I'm not entirely sure. All right, so let's do this. Let's wrap this up. We have our results, so I'm going to wrap this within a Laravel collection, and I just want to filter this down here. So let's go into the hits. And then this is an array, and I'm going to say for each hit, I want to pluck the document, and maybe let's just grab the title of the book for now. I just want an array or a collection, a Laravel collection, that contains only the titles for the results. So here's what I might do. I'm going to map over it, and for each hit, I'm going to return the document. All right, so now we're going to have a collection of only the documents. And then within the document, I'm just going to grab the title. So why don't we say hit document title. All right, and hopefully we did everything correctly here. Let's return the titles, come back, give it another run. And sure enough, if we pretty print, we have an array, in this case, of all of the matches, all right? So notice that Philosopher's Stone comes first, and then the Cursed Child comes last. This is kind of what we would naturally expect. But of course, you have full control over the sort order. So why don't we play around with this? So here's what we can do. I can say sort by, and we're going to provide some kind of schema value that we want to sort according to. Again, do we want to sort according to the ratings count? You could even sort according to a release year. Any kind of number by default will work just fine. We can even take that further. But as an initial starting point, think of things that are numbers that will help you. So for example, if I want to sort by ratings count in descending order, this is how we might do this. So if I come back and give this a refresh, we can see this result here. Why don't we reverse it? Let's do ascending order, which means the least ratings count will come first. Once again, give it a refresh, And now we can see, yeah, sure enough, we're going to get some kind of book about that universe, but not one of the core books will come first because, of course, those will have lesser ratings than the actual novels. So everything's working great. And yeah, you have full control here. You can even combine things. So for example, by default, Typesense has this thing called text match. And this is just a special keyword that represents how closely the query matched the results here. So I could say text match in descending order. And yeah, this is going to give you possibly what you expect. So notice, yeah, in this case, it's not really factoring in the ratings count because we overrode that. We said, no, just focus on the text match. And in this case, even though Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and Harry a History are wildly different in terms of what you're looking for, if you think about it, they both begin with the word Harry, right? So in the eyes of Typesense, in this case, they are matches. So now sometimes you have to think about, well, what do you do in the case of a tiebreaker? If Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone and Harry a History both have the same score because they both start with Harry, well, what is the tiebreaker? And we can have multiple tiebreakers if we want. Here's what we can do. Why don't we focus on a text match, but then in the event of a tiebreaker, let's say, what is the thing that determines whether one comes before the other? And yeah, we'll fall back to ratings count if we want. Ratings count in descending order. The one that has a higher ratings count will come first. Come back, reload, and now once again, we can see, okay, these all start with Harry, and they have much higher ratings count than that biography, Harry a History. So, of course, they should come first in the result set, and this is what we want. Now, in this case, notice we're getting the cuckoo's calling. I'm not even sure what that is. That's probably matching against one of the authors. So if I get this out of there, and we give it a reload, and I'm sorry, let's update this to Harry. Now we'll see the results that we'd probably expect. Great. So once again, if we switch back, we can reverse this and say, no, let's focus on the least ratings first. All right, now we're once again going to see one of these biographies. Full configurability at your fingertips. Let's do a little more. Let's say, well, yes, focus on the text match, but maybe the release year should be factored in. Maybe you consider that more important. An ancient book that has a lot of ratings, maybe for your search platform, isn't as important as a more recent book. So in that case, we could say publication year in ascending order would be oldest, or descending would be favor the newer ones first. Okay, so now if I switch back, yep, we can see Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, of course, was released much more recently than the original novels, so it comes higher up on the list at the top. Cool. Now, keep in mind, you could do a third level. You could do a third tiebreaker or a second tiebreaker, I suppose, where you could say, okay, well, after the publication year, then focus on the ratings count in descending order. So here's how you need to think about this. These are tiebreakers because by default, we're going to focus on what best match the query, right? But then assuming that multiple documents have the same score based on your query, like multiple books that start with the word Harry, then we say, what is the tiebreaker? And we say, all right, the tiebreaker is going to be the publication year. But now imagine there's still a tie there. There are multiple books that start with the word Harry that were released in the year 1998 or whatever. So now, well, what's the tiebreaker for that? If we have multiple Harry books released in 1998, what is the tiebreaker at that point? Well, at that point, let's say the one that has more ratings is popular. And yeah, these are the sorts of things you're going to be doing in your own applications. Okay, but for now, let's keep it very simple and just say match on the search query, and then we will favor the ratings count, and this is fine. All right, so let's reformat this. And then the last thing I'll show you is, of course, you can declare how many results you want per page. So we could say, just as an example, give me only 3 results. And now if I reload, of course, we're going to have an array here of only 3. But yeah, you can override this or stick with the defaults, whatever you want to do here. We have a big list of results. Cool. All right, let's move on to filtering now. And yeah, this is really easy. When you think of filtering, just think of where conditions. So imagine you wanted to say, give me all books that were released in the year 2000 or higher. All right, well, there you go. That's a filter. Set the release year to greater than or equal to 2000. All right, let me show you how. So let's open up our routes file, and you'll remember that we've set up a handful of playground routes just to see the full workflow. But notice it's getting a little bulky because we have to instantiate this client from scratch, where we pass through the nodes and the API key and the connection timeout settings. So why don't we just take 2 minutes and extract this into a Laravel service provider. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy this instantiation here, and I'm going to throw it into the service container. And here's how. I'm going to open up my application's service provider, and I'm going to register a new binding. So I can say bind, and when you think of bind, just think of put this into the container, bind it into the container. So I'm going to give it the name of the Typesense class. That will be our key. And when we resolve it, or basically when we pull it out of the container, and sometimes I think of toy chests. You put things into the toy chest, and then you pull it out of the toy chest. So when I pull client out of the toy chest, what I actually want to receive is this fully instantiated client object that already contains the configuration. And yeah, that's it. It's in the container. So now check this out. If I return to my routes file, I can remove this entirely and instead pull it out of the container like this. Done. I'll do the exact same thing here. Done. And then finally, we'll do one more right here. And now, I don't have to manually instantiate and configure it every single time. I've already done that, and it's inside the container, ready to go. Cool. All right, so now let's copy this, and we're going to create another playground route. This one will be for filter search. Okay, so here's what we want to do. I'm going to reproduce what we talked about at the beginning of the video. I want to grab all books that were released in the year 2000 or higher. Actually, before we do that, let's make it simple. Give me all books that were released in the year 2000, specifically 2000, that match a particular search query. All right, let's see how we can do that. First, I'm going to remove the titles and return the full result set so that we can see it in the browser. Let's go to Filter Search. And of course, we need to provide a query. All right, query equals dark. All right, so let's have a look. Let's pretty print. And here's all of our hits. So it looks like the top one is called Dead Until Dark by Charlene Harris. And the release year, or the publication year is the actual term here, is 2001. Okay, so now I want to say, no, give me only books that match the dark query, but were released in the year 2000, if any. Let's see how it turns out. I'm going to add a new filter by key. Okay, and what are we filtering by? Well, the publication year, right? All right, but next, let's complete this where condition. The publication year, should it be equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, one of many? Well, in this case, we said it must be equal to 2000. All right, so here's the syntax I want you to memorize. You have field name, followed by a colon, then an operator, then a value. All right, so let's do it together. Publication year is the field name, followed by a colon, and then the operator would be greater than, equal to, not equal to. In our case, it's very simple. Equal to, right? And now finally, we need the value. So the value in this case would be 2000. All right, so when you read this, I want you to say, all right, I'm going to filter this by the publication year where the year is equal to 2000. All right, let's see what we get, if anything. Come back and give this a reload. And now the top matching result is His Dark Materials. And let's check the release year. Bam, 2000. Let's just take another look. All right, here's another one, Batman Dark Victory. And once again, publication year is 2000. Very cool. All right, now though, what if we want to say, well, you know what? It could be the year 2000 or 2001. I can't quite remember. All right, so now we need to tweak this. We're kind of saying, well, the publication year can be 2000 or 2001, and we could write it like that. But I could also say, well, it's kind of in a range, right? It could be within 2000 up to 2001. So to declare a range, we can do this. Field name, colon, wrap it, sort of like in an array syntax. It's equal to one of the items within this array. At least that's sort of how I parse it in my head. So if I do something like this should do the trick. All right, let's give it a shot, refresh, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to search for publication year and then 2000. And yeah, we got lots of results there, many. If I check 2001, we got lots of results as well. But of course, 2002, nothing. 2003, because of course, those are not included in our array here. Okay, so yeah, you can imagine you want things like this. Well, it could be 2002, 2003, but you don't want to manually write this out in most cases. So it'd be cool if we could have a range where we say, yeah, just give me all books released in the first decade of the 2000s. All right, we'll use a range. And yeah, again, it's going to use syntax that you're probably familiar with already. We're going to use periods. 2000 to 2010. Sort of like how you might manually write it in real life. 2000 to 2010. Okay, so now one more time we give it a refresh. I think you're getting the basic idea. Let's look for 2003. We found it. 2005, yep, we got one called Dark Lover. No judgment. 2006, 2009, it works. But once again, 2011, it's not going to pull up anything. All right, so what kind of filters are available to us? Well, take a look at this. So here are the operators that are available to you. And again, I want you to notice they follow the exact same structure. It's always going to be field name, colon, operator, value, right? So let's pick a random one. How about greater than? All right. So if we wanted to say the price is greater than 100, the field name is price, colon, the operator is greater than, the value is 100. Let's pick another one. How about is not equal to? All right, here we go. This is the one we want. So the operator is, again, what you would normally expect in a programming language. All right, so the field name is status, colon, the operator is not equal to, and then the value is inactive. So we can use a string in this particular case. Give me all results where the status is not equal to inactive. And yeah, I think you get the basic idea. You can memorize this very, very quickly. And if not, this is available, of course, in the Typesense documentation. All right, so let's finish up by doing just a couple more. How about I want to say, give me all books where the author is equal to Blake Crouch. How would we do that? Well, it looks like we want this one at the top. All right, let's give it a shot. So filter my results by those where the authors, and remember it's plural in this case, is equal to Blake Crouch. All right, so I happen to know Blake Crouch wrote a book called Dark Matter, and our query is for dark, so maybe we'll get his book. All right, so we have our query set to dark. We've applied our filter, and sure enough, there we go. The top result is by Blake Crouch, and the title is Dark Matter. Okay, so notice now, let's keep going. The publication year for that book is 2016, but imagine we had an additional filter where maybe the publication year was set to 2000, right? Well, if we did that, of course, this would not be included in the result set. So let me show you how to do that. If we want to append filters, we can, once again, just use a common syntax you're already familiar with. Ampersand, ampersand, or two pipes for or. So in our case, if I said, give me books that match this query that were authored by Blake Crouch and the publication year, colon, equals value, exact same syntax, is 2000. Well, now, of course, if I come back and give it a refresh, yeah, in this case, we don't get any results, okay? But if I were to tweak this to 2016, give it a refresh, now we get exactly one hit. Notice we found one matching result, and again, Blake Crouch wrote Dark Matter in 2016. It fits. Okay, but now you could also do or. So you could say, all right, give me books that match our search query that were authored by Blake Crouch or the publication year was 2000. So any books by Blake or any books that match the query dark that were released in 2000. I'm not sure if we have any results, but let's see. And sure enough, we have 9 results. So once again, let's search for year 2000. And yeah, we get a bunch of books that were not by Blake Crouch, but they still are returned because they match the second part of that filter by clause. Very cool. Okay, so now let's keep going. Let's go back to publication year. Sometimes you want to say like, okay, give me the books that were released either 1990 to 2000 or 2010 to 2020, right? So you have multiple ranges. And can we do that? Absolutely. Let me show you how. So we've already learned that we can use this syntax to set a range, right? So now at this point, we're saying, give me books that were released in the year 1990 all the way up to 2000. All right, so that takes care of the first part. But then I think after that we said, but also maybe 2010 to 2020 or something like that. So here's what we can do. We could, of course, just copy this and say, well, or publication year is 2010 to 2020. Yeah, I think that will work. So come back and give it a refresh. And let's look for 2010, 2015, but also 1994. Yeah, that works. But there's actually a cleaner way we could do this. So let's get rid of this and instead use a comma separated list. I could say 2010 to 2020. All right, so let's give it a shot. I need to show you some proof. So let's search for publication year set to 1994. Yep, that fits. 91, 1990. Yep. But maybe nothing in 89 because that's not part of the results. And then 2000 will have something, but 2001 is not in the range. But 2010 is in the range and 15, but not 2022 or 21. So yeah, this is what you can see here is whatever it is you need to filter by, there will be a way to do it. And just refer to the documentation to learn more. So let's wrap up and say maybe you want to read an old book. You want to read a classic, and it needs to be released before the year, 1950 or something. So you'd want to say, all right, give me all books that match my query where the publication year is less than 1950. All right, well, let's do it one more time. The field name, colon, the operator, which would be less than, right? And then the value, which is 1950. All right, let's see what we get. Come back, give it a refresh, and it looks like we have only two results. We have Heart of Darkness released in 1899, and then finally we have, where are you? Same book, but it shows up two different times. I don't know, maybe it's a translation. Either way, it works. You get the idea. Okay, so now here's something to think about. Of course, you can provide these filters to your users. And of course, I'll show you how to do that when we focus on the front end a bit more. But you can also use it for special cases where you want to filter based upon maybe some status that your user has in your system, right? Things that cannot be indexed, but you still want factored into the query, right? So imagine like for something like Laracasts, if you wanted to say, all right, give me all courses that the user has completed, but also match this particular search query, right? Well, we know how to search, right? We know how to filter based on a query and a category. But then what about things like whether or not this user has completed the course versus that user? Well, for those situations, you can still use filter by clauses, right? You could just fetch all of the IDs that the user has completed. Give me all course IDs that are completed by the user, and then we are going to include those within a filter by clause. So maybe something like this. So our field is ID, right? Then a colon, the operator is equal to, and then we provide the ID of the course the user completed, right? So in this case, I'm saying, all right, search the courses in our example here, but filter them down. I only care about the courses that match the query and also have an ID of 5. And yeah, maybe they completed 2 courses. We could do something like this. But now what if they completed like 50 courses? Well, you could dynamically construct this if you want, and that's what you would do. But don't forget, we could also use one of many, right? So that would be the array syntax. I could say ID, colon, operator is this array syntax. And then, once again, we would dynamically fetch all of the IDs the user completed. So maybe something like this. Search courses for the query, but return only the ones that match the query and also have an ID of 5 or 12 or 20. And that's how we can do it. All right, so yeah, as you can see, it's incredibly flexible, and very likely whatever it is you need to accomplish, you can accomplish. All right, let's move on to something new in the next episode. All right, next up, I think we should move on to faceting. So yeah, when you hear that word facet, think of group by or categorize by. And you know what? You've seen this a million times. If you've ever gone to Amazon and you perform a search, you see your results off to the right, and then to the left, you're going to see a bunch of checkboxes, right? So maybe if we're looking for books, we'll see all authors who are represented within that result set. And if I click on one of their names, well, now the results update, right? Now the results show my search query matches, but also only the books that match the particular author name that I selected. That is a facet. We could also maybe have a facet for the release decade. So I want to see only the books released in the 2000s decade or the 2010s or the 2020s, right? So yeah, it's a way to further categorize the results so that we can provide a better UI to our users. All right, so let me show you how. Let's open up our routes file. And once again, we're sticking with our playground approach here. So I will add another route, and this one will be for faceting. All right, so I'm going to illustrate this in 2 steps. In this video, I'll show you programmatically how to facet our result set. And then in the next episode, we're actually going to write some front-end code and some view code to display these results. Okay, so let's have a look here. We are now searching our books database for this query. I'm only looking in the title field. That's the only thing that qualifies for a match. We're going to sort by the closest match, and then if we have a tie, the tiebreaker will be the ratings count, so the higher rating comes first. Next, we get 50 results per page, and then in the last episode, we added a filter. I will remove that now. All right, so if we leave it like this and we view this in the browser, here you can see our query, faceting, and then the query is set to Harry. If we view the results, yeah, we've seen this a bunch of times, right? We see all the results, but no categorizing or no grouping or no facets. So let's return to our code, and now I'm going to say facet by authors, but let's see if this works. Let's come back and give it a refresh, and we get an error, object not found. We could not find a facet field named authors in the schema. Okay, so here's the issue. When we defined our schema, and if I switch back, we did this in the very first or second episode. Here's where we defined the schema. As part of this, we need to be explicit about which fields should be facetable or should be qualified as facets. So in our case, notice we have authors here, but I didn't specify that it is a facet. Okay, let's update this now and then re-import and rebuild our database, so to speak. Let's set facet for this field to true. So yeah, just remember this. If you ever want to categorize results based on a particular field, you need to be explicit here. And just think of it as our way of saying, all right, I want to cluster all of the results into categories specifically for authors. Okay, so now we have updated our schema, but it's not magic. It doesn't magically take effect. We would need to rebuild this index. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to hit this endpoint again, and you'll remember that, well, we build up the schema, and yeah, I'm just going to delete the existing books database or index so that we can populate a brand new one from scratch. So at that point, we will have a new index, but it won't have any rows or documents within it. So if I scroll down, we have another endpoint here where we once again read that books database and we bulk import it. All right, so let's hit these 2 routes one after another. Or, of course, we could move these to artisan commands so that we can run this directly from the CLI. But for now, in the browser is nice and friendly, so let's do that. Create collection. There we go. Next, import collection. Books imported. I think we're ready to go. So now let's go back to that faceting endpoint. And once again, I will set the query to Harry. And now, because authors is listed as a facet, notice we have this new key here, facet counts. All right, so let's have a look here. Let's just go through it together. Sure enough, like before, we still have our matching results. Nothing has changed there. The only change is right up here. We now have additional categorization, it's hard to say, categorization data. So for facet counts, we have an array of objects where each object represents one author who was included as part of the result set. So here I can see, yep, J.K. Rowling has 10 books or 10 items or documents that were included as part of the results, right? So remember, we perform the search, we find the matching results, and then we cluster those results according to, in this case, the author's facet. That's sort of what's going on here. So yeah, I can see David Colbert has one book in here. Sean Klein has one book in here as well. And as you can imagine, we can represent these within a sidebar. Now I can show all books that match your query, but then off to the side, we can have a little section. And that section will say authors. And within that box, I'm going to have a bunch of checkboxes. And each checkbox will be one author name who is included within the results. And what we can do, and we're going to have to get a little fancy here, a little dynamic, we're going to have to write some JavaScript. But once we check one of these checkboxes, I can repopulate the result set. I can say, okay, you checked on J.K. Rowling here, so here's what you want. You want to perform a new search query that matches whatever the query was, in this case, Harry, but also it needs to be filtered by this particular author. So again, faceting allows us to do that, and it takes two steps, right? The first step is to perform the query and compile all of the facets. We then pass these to our front end, we render them, and then we listen for when the user selects one or more of them. Okay, so in this video, here's what you need to know. When you define your schema, you need to think ahead, and you need to ask yourself, is this field a particular kind of field that we might want to categorize upon? I might want to group results based upon this value. And the answer is yes. I'll give you another example, once again for Laracasts courses. What would make sense in terms of grouping or facets for a Laracast course? And if you want, hit pause and think about it. Course has a title, course has a description, course has comments, but also course has like a taxonomy, a category. Is this a frameworks course? Is this a testing course? And then also our courses can be assigned multiple topics, right? So you have a top-level category, but then there can be many topics within it. So maybe a course that deals with Alpine.js could have the topic Alpine.js. But maybe that course also uses Typesense. Well, we might have a topic called Typesense. Maybe the course also uses Laravel Livewire. We might have a topic called Livewire. So as you can imagine, these are perfect examples for facets. If I'm searching for some kind of course, in the sidebar, it would be useful if I could see all topic names that are represented as part of that search result. That way I can say, you know what, I'm actually only interested in the courses that match my query, but are also under the topic alpine.js. And this, once again, is what faceting allows for. So in the next episode, let's build a simple UI. All right, welcome to a new chapter. We're now going to switch over to the front end and build a search UI. But you know what? I'd like to take this super incrementally, one step at a time. So in this video, we'll have a simple blade file. You submit a form, you see the results, right? Very basic. But then we'll expand. We will highlight the results. We will set it up so that as the user is typing their search query, we instantly display results. We will add facets to the sidebar. So I really do think you're going to get a lot out of this. Let's get going. So as you can see here, our routes file is empty. We're going to start from scratch. All right, let's get going. The very first thing I'd like to do is return a view, and let's just call it search. All right, let's go ahead and create that file. And yeah, in this case, we don't really have a full site here. We don't have the layout file, so I'm going to put it all inline, as you see here. Search for something. All right, let's have a look in the browser. All right, we got something on the page. It's not nothing. Okay, let's switch back and get to work. So the first thing I'm going to do is once again pull in Tailwind, but I don't want to deal with a build step or anything like that. So let's just reference it from a CDN, like this. We can use cdn.tailwindcss.com. So now instantly we have access to all of the default Tailwind utility classes. So now if I come back and give it a refresh, we can see the update there. Great. All right, so now, well, before we even add a form, before we add an input, let's just imagine we're reading from the query string. We're going to perform the search and return the results. So with that in mind, let's return to our routes file. All right, so let's create our query variable, and I'm going to read the query string for Q. That's pretty common. But this time, I'm going to add a default of star, and this is a special symbol with Typesense that just means everything, right? All right, so now let's perform our search. So we will have our Typesense client, and remember, in our service provider, we bound client into the service container so that we instantiated and configured it as we would need for our application. So now when I ask for client, it's ready to go, and I don't have to set the API key in the nodes all over again. All right, cool. So let's switch back, and we'll say client, collections, books, documents, search. All right, let's provide our configuration. And yeah, this is a good refresher if you're working along. So let's see what AI has for us here. It's saying, yeah, the queue is query. That's correct. We're going to query by the title only in this particular case. We will not yet facet. We'll add that later. And yeah, let's just keep it super simple like this. All right, so if we fetch the results and I return them as JSON, if I come back and I give this a refresh, yeah, and this is a review at this point. You already know how to do this. So in our case, it's just returning everything, basically. Maybe it's doing a default sorting, but there is no actual query taking place here. But if I were to override this and say query equals project, I'm sorry, let's fix that, project, even though it should still work. If we take a look, it looks like the top result is called the Rosie project. Never heard of it, but lots of ratings. Okay, very cool. All right, so now, yeah, if you want, you could just take this huge object and pass it to your Blade view. And yeah, for a server-side rendered app, that's fine. But if instead you're going to pass this to your front end, and it's going to have to be sent to your JavaScript, there's a lot here. You may not want to do that. So with that in mind, why don't we just pluck the information we need? For now, in this video only, I want to go into hits, and I just want to grab the title for each document. So let's do that now. Collect results, hits, pluck, document. All right, so now, yeah, if we were to take this incrementally to show you what we get here, we now have an array of only the documents. But like I said, we want to further pluck the title. So using Laravel collections, I can use the dot syntax like this. Give me the document, and within each document, give me the title. So now if we give it a refresh, I have an array of only the titles. And yeah, for this initial example, it's all I care about. Later, we'll grab some more. We'll call this titles, or why don't we just say results? And I'm going to pass that to my view. All right, let's switch over to our search place and render the results. I'll do it within a simple unordered list. So I'm going to use a for else here. And we'll say for results as results. And what's nice about this is I could then say, well, if there are no results, what do we do on that condition? And in this case, I can just say no matching results. Okay, so yeah, for each one, why don't we display the result, which would be the title itself. So let's echo the result. All right, so if we have a look, there we go. It's not very pretty, but it works. If I now swap this out with dark, and there's the matching results, hairy, you get the idea. Okay, now let's style it just a little bit. So very quickly, why don't we put padding 8 all around, and we'll say for the unordered list, let's do a border, maybe border gray of 300, and within it, we'll have just a little padding all around. How about padding Y2 instead and padding X4? Yeah, we're not trying to win any awards, of course, just something reasonably good looking. Okay, next I want an input above it. So let's do that now. We'll add our form here. So within it, we're going to have an input, one more time, with a type of search. We'll give it a name of Q. And when the form submits, of course, just basic form submission here, it is going to go to search, and the method is going to be get. So when I submit this form, it's going to make a get request to the current page and send through a Q value in the query string. So let's give it a shot. Oh, we need to see it a little better. Let's give it a class of border. We'll do the exact same border gray 300, but let's set border bottom to 0 so that we don't have doubled up borders. All right. There we go. Let's increase the width. And yeah, we just want it kind of connected there, like it's all one little component. Okay, so what should we do here? Well, first, by default, because we already have a query, we'll say dark once again, then the input should be populated with the current query, right? So let's do this. Let's put these on their own line since we don't have a lot of real estate. And then I will set the value equal to request queue. All right, come back, give it a refresh, and there we go. Next, let's give it the exact same padding on the left and right. There you go. And maybe, yeah, we're just going to duplicate the padding to make it consistent. Very cool. So now for dark, here are the matching search results. And of course, there's lots of accessibility to be considered here. We should ideally be able to press the down arrow key to select the results, but that is more advanced, more intricate stuff, far beyond what we're focused on right now. So just give me a little leg room to ignore some of that stuff for now. Okay, great. So if I were to change this, well, even though we don't have a submit form, by default, if I press enter, it will do the default action, right? Which is submit the form, which means I instantly see the results here. But of course, we could add a little submit button as well if we want. Further, because we have an input type of search, we get an X button for free that will clear that out. All right, so once again, let's say project Hail, run it, and actually, it didn't bring up what I thought it would, but maybe this book list is a little bit older. I was expecting Project Hail Mary. Anyways, we do see the Rosie project and the Happiness project. This is all looking pretty good. Okay, so think about what we've accomplished here. If I go back to our routes file, all we really did is when you load the page, we read the query string, and if you didn't pass anything, we'll just search everything. We will always perform a search, and that way, no matter what, we have something to look at. We have some recommendations to look at. And of course, in real life, these would be clickable. And maybe you click on it and it takes you to the dedicated book page. So yeah, I would imagine based on these results, the default is going to be popularity. It's going to show me the most popular books in that entire database. And this would probably match that. Okay. Next, we perform our search, and we've learned how to do that. Grab your collection, and then search through the documents for the query, and then specify what you are querying by. So yeah, once again, remember, if you're going to look for Blake Crouch, who wrote Dark Matter, well, it's not going to look through the authors. It's only going to look through the titles. You need to be explicit about what you are searching. So if you wanted to do authors as well, include that. And now if I run it again, we get the top matching result. It's going to work. No problem at all. Okay, so now if we come back, we have our results. In this little example, all we cared about was the title. In real life, you're going to want a little bit more. But we fetch those titles and we pass them to our view, and then we render them in as simple a way as we can possibly manage. We loop over them and we show the results. And then we have a form above it where you can submit for new results. So far, incredibly easy. In the next episode, let's take it one step further. I'll see you then. All right, welcome back. So now let's take it one step further, and I would like to add highlighting to my results. All right, so let's do this. Once again, let's return the results. And yeah, for now, we're going to keep it, again, very simple. We're only going to query by the title. All right, so now if I give it a refresh, you'll notice for the hits, in addition to document, we also have these two sections for highlighting. So here's one and here's another, and these are just different ways to access the same highlighted or marked search result. The only difference is with highlight, you have an object that is keyed by the field that received the highlight, whereas in the next one, you just have an array of objects. So yeah, if you think about it, what we could do is say, all right, I want to pluck the highlights right here, and that's going to give us all of these for each matching result. So if we were to move return results down here, again, we're just going to review this incrementally. Now, this is what we get. Okay, but once again, we can take this further. All I really care about in this example is the matching snippet. So let's do this. Because highlights is an array of arrays, why don't we flatten it, but not all the way. Let's just do one level of flattening. So now if I give it a refresh, yeah, this is what we want. So notice if I didn't pass 1 here, it's going to flatten everything, and that's not what I want. Just a single level of flattening. All right, so then finally we have these objects where I can finish up by plucking the snippet itself. Pluck, snippet. And that's going to give us everything we need here. All right, so now once again, I have an array of the matching titles, but this time we have proper highlighting that is based upon your search query. So if I change this once again to matter, you'll see any reference to matter is going to be wrapped within mark tags that I can then style however I want. All right, let's send it to the view. Come back, give it a refresh. And now we're seeing the full HTML because we're escaping it, but yeah, it's perfect. It's exactly what we want. So let's switch to the view and update this. Right down here, we'll say, without escaping, I want the full HTML here, display the result. Come back, give it a refresh. And again, we have some default highlighting here that will take any mark tag and add a yellow background, which is often what you want. Let's try it out. Harry, very good. Project. Wizard, and yeah, notice in this case, even though I spelled it wrong, we have type sensitivity with Typesense, and it knows, this is probably what you were looking for, so it can account for that, which is cool. All right, yeah, we're working incrementally, so we've made one more improvement. In the next episode, let's take it even further. I'll see you then. All right, welcome back. Let's take it another step further. So now we have our search working. Next, in the sidebar, I'd like to have a list of filters. So in this case, I'd like to see all matching authors who are represented as part of these search results. So we've learned a little bit about facets. Now, let's put it into practice. So let's start once again in our routes file. And like we did before, we're going to return the results object from Typesense so we can see what we're working with. All right, so once again, well, how do we grab the facets? How do we find the matching authors? Well, by default, it's not included. We have to explicitly request faceting. So if I come back, I can say facet by, and now we provide any fields that we have interest in, but also any fields that are designated as facets. So remember, you designate that when you create the schema. And if you forgot how to do that, go back to the episode where we create our first schema. So yeah, in this case, we're going to facet by authors. Now, if I come back and give it a refresh, we're going to get something a little different. Now we're going to have this facet counts key. So you'll see it's an array, and we have an object here that has counts. And yeah, just take a look at all of this. So here is the facet field name. So you could imagine looping over all of your facet counts and saying for each one we have, because we might facet by authors, we might facet by the decade that the book was released. It could be a number of things. The length, maybe, if you want to narrow it down to short, medium, long reads. You can really filter however you want, however would make sense. And then we have the total values for this particular facet. Okay, so then finally within the counts object, we have all of the items, in this case, all of the authors who are represented or included as part of the search results. All right, so yeah, why don't we just pluck what we need and then send it to the view? All right, so let's do this. We'll say results, facet counts, and once again, I'm going to collect these so that I can easily map over them in an object-oriented way. Of course, you can use array map if you prefer. So let's map over them, and for each facet, once again, if I just die and dump immediately, so that we're on the same page, now we're going to have an array, we have the field name, and then we have all of the matching authors in this case. So I care about the field name, so let's return an array, and we'll have the name, will be facet field name. All right, what else do we want? I would like all of the results here. So each one contains the count, the highlight, the value. We can keep that. We'll say filters. Yeah, because if you think about it, each of those authors is kind of a filter. You select the author, and then it should further filter the search results down to those that match the query, but also were written by the selected author. So we'll say filters equals, and yeah, if we wanted to grab that, but you know what? I think it's fine. We're just going to do something like this. Okay, so this is our facets. And once again, if we do a sanity check to see what we got, now we have an array of objects, and each object contains the facet name as well as the list of filters. And I think this looks pretty good. So now I'm going to pass this to our view like this. Okay, now let's display it in our view. Go into search, and let's see here. Let's wrap all of this here. This will be, this will be sort of our main section. And then we're going to have an aside, like so. And then why don't we wrap this whole thing in a div so that it can be our grid. All right, so we'll say facets go here. And if we come back, give it a refresh. Yep, it's top to bottom. So I'm going to say, no, I want a grid. And I want it to be like a 12-column grid. So grid calls 12. The aside will be 3. It'll span 3 grid rows or columns. And then the last one will be 3 plus 9 equals 12, right? So call span 9. Come back, give it a refresh. Now they're side to side. Next, what should we do here? Actually, why don't we change this? Maybe a little more space, and that'll narrow it a little bit. I'll add a gap. Yeah, it's good enough. Okay, so now let's loop over our facets. And remember, there could be one, as there is in this case, but in real life there could be many that you are faceting by. All right, let's get started. So right here, we'll say for each facets as facet. And yeah, remember, if you're working along, you're just going to forget what's inside these objects, and that's totally fine. So remember to use DD. DD is your friend. If you're in a blade file, dump is your friend. And you just quickly got to check, all right, what's in here? Yep. Okay, so we have name, and then I'll say right here, this will be the facet name. What else do I need? Oh, we have filters, so I should loop over the filters, and for each one, I display the value. Okay, so let's do that. For each facet, filters as filter. Then once again, maybe this is also an unordered list. Let's reformat. I think later this will probably be a form, but for now we're just getting it on the page. And then we'll say filter value. Give it a refresh, and there you go. So let's style it a little bit. We'll say you are font bold. This will be UC words. It'll capitalize the first letter. All right. Next, why don't we wrap this whole thing? This will be its own little component. Once again, that way I can say border, gray 300, padding X4, and I'm sorry, border. There you go. Add some padding Y. Of course, we could extract these into reusable styles or components if we want. But yeah, you get the general idea here. So now if I look for matter, the author's facet sidebar section will update as well. If I look for Harry, then of course we're going to see J.K. Rowling at the top. It's working. Cool. So why don't we do this? Why don't we say border B, border gray 300. Like I said, we're not trying to win any awards. And even if we were trying, I'm not going to win because I barely know what I'm doing here. But we can do a couple things here. Let's remove the padding. Yeah. And then here I can manually add it back in and do it here as well. Yep, and then PY2. So we're just adjusting it so we have this solid line that extends to the very bottom. Maybe I should do this as well? No, maybe just PBT or PB2. Good enough for our needs. So finally, should there be no padding on the bottom? I think that looks good. Okay, it doesn't matter. So now we have one section. And of course, if we were faceting by more than one section, we could display those results as well. That's the entire point. Okay, so now that we can see which authors are represented as part of these search results, well, that's only partially helpful. In the next episode, I want to take it a step further. I'd like to see a little checkbox next to each name. And when I select it, it will submit the form and refresh the results to include only the results that have, in this case, matter in the name, but also were written by whoever I happen to select here. So I hope you're excited. I'll see you in the next episode. All right, so here you can see we have highlighted search results, which is pretty cool and really easy to implement. And then off to the side, we have our facets. So we have all of the top authors who are included as part of these results. But yeah, right now in our implementation, you can't click on these. They don't do anything. So yeah, let's discuss two different ways that we might go about implementing this. All right, so let's start within our search view. And yeah, you should be focused on the aside here. So notice we loop over each facet, and for each one, we display a div that contains the heading as well as a list of each filter for that facet. And yeah, once again, if I switch back, we have our heading and a list of each filter. Cool. So yeah, one thing we could do, it's maybe not the most flexible option, but maybe it would work for you, is just make each of these filters an anchor tag. So yeah, you don't even need a form in this case. You can dynamically figure out what the URL should be and what the query string should be, and then the user clicks on it and it just reloads the page. That would be an option. So here's what you might do in that case. This would now be an anchor tag, so let's wrap it. And yeah, once again, it's still going to visit the search page. So now if I come back and refresh, yes, I can click on any of these, but we're not doing anything. We're not taking that value and sending it along with the request. So let's make sure we do that as part of the query string. Maybe something like this. In the query string, we'll set the author name equal to the filter value. All right, so now once again, if I click on one of these and I open up the URL so you can see better, sure enough, it passed through author and then Stephen King in this case. But here's one issue. If I look for, what's a Stephen King book? How about, it's not going to work. That's too generic. The Shining. Okay, so now if I click on Stephen King, though, watch what happens. Currently, the URL includes the query, but when I click on Stephen King, we lose the query because it wasn't included when the user clicked that link. So let's make sure that we merge in any of the existing query string values in the URI along with the author. And here's how we could do that. So let's do this. Let's swap it out entirely with a call to Laravel's URL query method. This allows us to generate an absolute URL, but also send through query string values. So for example, if I just did something like this, we're going to get a URL to search. Give it a refresh, click on it, and that's the URL, right? But if I command click, we can also send through query string values. So if I were to say, excuse me 2 times, foo is bar, and come back, refresh. If I click on this now, you'll see we went to search, and then we appended foo equals bar. It takes care of that for us. So yeah, what you could do is maybe start with request all, or maybe just grab all of the things within the query string. So now, yeah, if I switch back, let's look for, once again, Shining. All right, notice the query string. Next, if I click on one of these, notice it retains the query string. So now all I have to do is keep the existing query string, but then merge in the current author. So if we want to do that, maybe, and I apologize, I don't have too much real estate here. Why don't we switch? Yeah, that's better. Okay, so let's do an array merge, and I'm going to merge in the author equals filter value with the existing query string. Yeah, I think that looks good. So let's give it another shot. Let's start from scratch with the Shining. We have one issue here. What did we forget? We forgot to close out the array there. All right, refresh. And if I take a look at the URL, we have search query equals the Shining. But now if I click on Stephen King, it's not going to update because we're not yet doing anything with that value. But if we take a look at the URL, we have our author name, and we still have the query string, which is what we want. Okay, but now, what if I were to search for, once again, matter? If I give it a refresh, now it resets the author name, and that's probably what you would want, right? If I make a new search, I probably don't want to retain any of the existing filters because that wouldn't make sense. I want to start from scratch. Look for matter, and then filter it down to any of these authors, as you can see here. Okay, so now let's do this. Let's add a class of link. Oh, I thought Tailwind had something for that. All right, let's say text blue 500, hover, underline, just quick dummy styling. And yeah, that would work. Okay, so now that we know how to update the request, let's now receive that on the back end and figure out how to tell Typesense to filter the results the way we need to. Let's switch over. I'm going to open up my routes file. And yeah, let's just do this right up here. Let's die and dump all of the request data so you can see what we're working with. So I will click on Thomas Hobbs here. And sure enough, we send through an array, ultimately, that has the query as well as the single author that we are trying to filter by. Okay, so now why don't we check for that? We could do something like this. If request filled the author, and by the way, if you're not familiar with filled, it determines if the instance contains a non-empty value for the given key. So it checks, do we have an author key? And also, is it populated? Is it anything but empty? So if that were the case, then we need to filter by the author, right? So if I come back and give this a refresh, sure enough, we caught that. Cool. So let's take care of this. What would we need to do in this case? Well, we would need to update the search parameters to be explicit that we need to filter by the author. So with that in mind, I'm going to select this entire array, and I'm going to save it to a variable called search params, and then I will declare them right up here. That way we can append to it. So now, if we have something for author, yeah, I want to do something like this. Search params, filter by, which we learned about a few episodes ago. And yeah, don't forget the format. It'll be field name, followed by a colon, followed by the operator, and then the value itself. So in our case, I want to say, well, filter it down to where the author is equal to the value that was passed through the query string. So I can say author, colon, equals, and then I will append the request author. Okay, so now at this point, if I were to die and dump the search params and I give it a refresh, now we are querying by matter. We're searching through the title field only. We're going to facet by the authors, but then I'm going to further filter it down. The only books I actually care about are the ones that match my query, but also were written by Graham Greene in this case. Cool. It's just not that hard. So let's bring it back. We now perform our search. We return results written by Graham Greene, and then we render them. So let's give it a shot. Back to the browser, give it a refresh. Oh, we could not find a filter. I keep making this mistake. Don't forget, it's actually authors is the field name because, of course, a book can have one or more authors. All right. So now if I come back and I give it a refresh, and yeah, I don't know this book, but I do know it was written by Graham Greene. Okay, so we're doing fairly well in this case. A couple little things, though. Like, let's look for Hobbit instead. We know that's written by Tolkien. And if I click on one of these, well, yes, I see the results, and I am filtering by Tolkien. But notice if I try to select something else, it's like it suddenly stopped working. And that's because, well, notice the author is not updating. So what's going on here? Well, I'll show you. Let's go back to PHP Storm, into my search page. And yeah, right here where we build up the link, we are taking the existing request, but then we are merging in the author. However, in this case, I want the new author to always take precedence. And right now, we're doing the opposite. If there is an author in the query string, which there is after you make your first selection, right? That always takes precedence over what you provide first. So this is an easy fix. We're just going to move it to the end. And that's it. So now if I come back and refresh, I should be able to filter by David Wenzel, and yep, that's working. Let's go to Chuck. Yeah, I guess we have more than one book called The Hobbit, which is a little weird, but it is in fact working. Let's go to Matter. Let's look for Gar Reynolds' version, and take a look at that book if you want. Okay, so let's talk about the pros and cons here. Pro is it's actually fairly easy to implement. All you really need to figure out is what your URL should be, and that's just not very difficult at all. However, a downside is you can't multi-select. So notice in all of these cases, you select one author, and that's the author you're going to get. There's no way to say, well, give me multiple authors. I care about searches that match this query and are written by this author or that author or that author. Right now, we can't do that, right? It's just not going to work. So that's an issue. Instead, we might solve that by returning to a traditional form. That way, each of our filters could contain little checkboxes. And if I check each one, that will update a list of authors that we ultimately send back to the server. So I'm going to show you how to work on that in the next episode. All right, so have a look at this. We currently have search results along with clickable filters in the sidebar. And yeah, each of these filters itself is nothing more than an anchor tag. It fills up the query string, you click on it, it reloads the page, and it updates the results. And this is fine, but it's not the most flexible thing in the world. I would love the option to select one or many authors that I want to filter by. So let's figure out how to do that in this video. Let's return to our search page, and now, rather than an anchor tag, I don't think that's going to work anymore. Instead, why don't we use traditional form inputs? So let's do this. Why don't we have a label that wraps a checkbox, something like this, and just temporarily, I'm going to hard-code it because it's easier to understand. All right, let's have a look in the browser. Now we see it twice because we are hard-coding Stephen King within a loop that has 2 items, but that's okay. We'll fix that in a minute. So why don't we set up the alignment here? Maybe on the label, I'll set a class of flex, item center, and then just put a little gap in between the checkbox and the label itself, and that looks good. Now I can select it, but I can't click on the name itself because they're not synced up. So yeah, we could do something like add an ID to the input, maybe author, and then again, this would all be determined dynamically, and then I could reference it here. Okay, so now I can select the label or the name itself, and that will toggle the checkbox, which is what I want in this case. Okay, now, well, if I select this, it should automatically submit the form, right? So, sounds like we need to wrap this whole thing within a form. Why don't we do that right up here? So here's our form, and it's going to wrap the entire loop, as you see there, and I'll reformat. Next, we no longer need this old code from the previous episode, so I will delete that. And where's our form going? Well, once again, it's going to go to the search page, and it's going to make a GET request as part of that. So, right now, because we don't have a name value for the input, it's just going to submit and not include any of the relevant data we care about. So, once again, let's add a name to this. Now, here's what we could do. If you think about it, I want the user to be able to select multiple checkboxes. So why don't we have all of the checkboxes share the same name, and we can use that sort of array-like syntax with forms. Something like this, filters, authors. So that way we could have potentially one or more that gets submitted to the server. Okay, cool. So now finally, we just need to say, well, when you check on this, when you check this checkbox, I immediately want to submit the form. And I'm just going to do this inline if you don't mind. Why don't we say on change this.form.submit, and that will be fine. Let's reset our search results. So have a look at the current URL, no query at all. Let's look for Harry. And we're still hard coding the author name just for a little bit longer. But notice if I select one of these, well, we lost our selection, so we'll fix that in just a moment. But if I take a look at the URL, we have our search, and we did include filters. So filters, authors equals on, but that's not quite what we want, right? We actually want the value to be equal to the author name. So let's set the value equal to the author name, like this. Okay, so now one more time, if I select this and I take a look, yeah, we're getting pretty close now. We are sending through Stephen King. Okay, now let's make it dynamic. So to give you a little refresher, let's do DD here on a single filter. And you'll see that we get, for each filter, the count, which is the number of results that this author is responsible for. And then we have the highlighted as well as just the value itself. So really, the only thing I care about here is the value itself. Cool. So let's update this to the filter value. All right, next let's do the ID. And I'd like to do this very quickly. We want to be careful about just doing filter value because that would ultimately end up with something like Stephen King, capitalized with a space in it. And if he has some kind of hyphen or an apostrophe or something like that, that might mess things up. So very quickly, let's just fix this as a temporary variable. We'll say something like ID equals filter value, and I'll show you this incrementally, okay? So let's say die and dump the ID. That gives us James Patterson in this case. All right. Now let's say string replace, and we're going to look for any space and replace it with a dash. All right. Now we have James dash Patterson. Next, let's do string to lower. Come back, refresh. Now we have lowercase. And yeah, I'm sure there's other things we should search for, maybe an apostrophe or something like that, if you wanted to do a second level. So what I can actually do, you may not know this actually, is to string replace, you can provide an array. So you do it like this. You could say look for a space and replace it with a dash. For the second item in the array, search for an apostrophe and replace that with nothing. So that would be a way to do multi-search and replace. Come back, refresh, we're still going to get the same thing, but imagine that filter value was like James, I don't know, for some reason he has an apostrophe there, Patterson. After we make this change and come back, you'll see that is removed, whereas before, that would not be removed, and we'd mess up our value there. All right, just a little tip, something to be aware of there. Okay, so now I could update this to author ID, and then if I come down here, this would be author ID, same thing. Okay, finally, we can update the filter value, and that looks good. Come back, give it a refresh, and now let's look for shining. Take a look at the URI. Next, I'll click on Stephen King. And again, we need to deal with this, but it still updates the filters. So we have filters, authors equals Stephen King. So now if you think about it, we have two forms. We have a form right here, and then we have another form in the sidebar. And that's why when I select it here, we submit that sidebar form that does not currently include the query string. So again, if you're working with a lot of JavaScript, you'd handle this in different ways. But for now, I think what we can do is just set up a hidden input as part of this side form. So we can do something right up here. Let's do inputs type equals hidden, and I'm going to set the value equal to the query string, or I'm sorry, the query itself. And then we'll say name Q. So I'm just ensuring that even when this form gets submitted, we don't forget to include the user's search query as part of that. So now, if I were to come back, we look for shining. Here is our query string. Good. I add Stephen King to that. Again, we need to deal with the check status, but if I check the URI, we've retained that the query is shining, and now we've included the filters itself. So now check this out. Let's go back to our routes file. And once again, I'm going to die, if I can type, die and dump the request data. All right, so now, yes, we get the query and the filters, but one little thing. Notice that authors is actually set to a string. So filters is properly an array. Remember, that's our facets. We could have any number of those. But authors could also be one or many authors that we want to filter by. But right now it's set to a string. All right, so let's just turn that into an array effectively as well. Let's return to our search. And here is the name. So we have filters, authors. But let's just add one more. So now, take a look at this. Let's resubmit the form, Stephen King. And once again, if I die and dump what we have there, now, filters, authors is itself an array. So now we have support for filtering by any number of authors. Okay, so now at this point, if I were to die and dump request filters.authors, if I come back and refresh, now this will be an array. Okay, so let's think about it now. We have filters.authors, which is an array of author names. Here's what we might do. Let's come down here and say, okay, well, if we have any authors, then when we construct our filter syntax, well, I can't just do this, right? So if I were to die and dump the search params, yeah, actually, we can't even get that far because we're trying to convert an array into a string. Okay, so let's do this. Let's say implode, and we're going to separate them by a space. Okay, so now if we die and dump the search params, There we go. We're starting to get there. But now think about it. What if we had multiple authors like this? It's a little hard to read, but yeah, if we did another one, and filters authors equals John Doe or something like that. Well, now notice we're saying, all right, filter this down where the authors equals Stephen King, comma, John Doe. That's not what we want. At this point, we have to decide, do we want to say where Stephen King and John Doe are both the authors of a book? And that would only be the case if they wrote a book together. Or do we want to say, no, give me any books where the author is either Stephen King or John Doe? So potentially one or the other, right? So if we want to do that, we need a different syntax here. Why don't we use the array syntax like this? Authors, and our operator is going to be an array in this case, right? So we learned that we have A, B, C, and we're saying, well, it has to be one of these items. That's how we do that. So come back, give it a refresh, and there we go. So yeah, whenever you see this array syntax, just think is one of. Authors is one of Stephen King or John Doe. Cool. So we might want to do a little tweaking there, but it's enough to get us started. All right, and it seems to be working. Very cool. So now notice that even though I have selected Stephen King, and it is in fact represented within the URI, it's not currently checked. So we can do that very quickly. Let's go into our search view. And yes, as you know, you can just set checked here, and that would turn it on, but it'll turn all of them on, of course, which we don't want. So you may not know this, but Laravel has a handy-dandy checked blade directive. So if you give it a Boolean, it will be listed as checked. If you give it false, of course, it'll be deselected. So let's just dynamically figure out whether or not this checkbox should be checked. Maybe something like this. So if you think about it, if we were to look within request filters.authors, that's going to include an array of all the authors who have currently been selected, right? So all of the authors who should have checked checkboxes, right? So why don't we just look in that array and see, well, do we see one that contains the current author name in the loop? And if so, it should be checked. All right, easy enough. Let's say in array, our needle is the current author's name. Our haystack is going to be this array here. And I think, with any luck, that should do it. So let's come back and give it a refresh. Argument 2 must be of type array, but null was given. That would be because in this case, if we haven't selected any, then of course filters.authors will be null. So let's make sure it's always set to, if nothing else, an array. Come back, give it a refresh, and now let's look for shining. Good. Let's choose Stephen King. Now it's selected, and I see only the results that have that match, which is cool. All right, so now let's just do a tiny bit of cleanup. We have a couple more things to make dynamic, and then I'm going to let you go. All right, so you'll notice right now we're still hard-coding author, even though we're within a loop. So if I were to die and dump the facet itself, of course we can fetch the author or the facet name dynamically. So let's do that now. So I can change this to facet name. And yeah, you can see why I chose to hard-code things at the beginning, just because this can get a little confusing, right? But if you refactor to this, it's not quite as confusing because you already know what it is. Okay, so I'm going to update this to facet name as well. This can become facet name, and finally this one as well. All right, let's make sure everything is still working. Give it a refresh. That looks good. Dark resets everything. I can now select to filter it down. This looks good to me. Next up, this section right here, it's probably okay, but if you don't like the idea of doing that within your view, that's fine as well. Here's what we could maybe do instead. Let's copy this and return to the routes file. And yeah, here's where we have our facet counts, and then we have filters. So once again, let's just die and dump facet, let's fix that, facet count to show you what we have here. Yeah, now we have an array where each one of these represents a single filter. So why don't we just override that and be explicit about the data that we want to send to the view. So here's what I'll do. Right here, let's do this. Collect all of these and let's map over them. We're going to call this filter. And yeah, I'm just going to be clear what I want. I want to return the count would probably be helpful. So let's grab that. Filter count. Next, value. That's fine. I kind of like name more, though. This is the filter name rather than just generic value. So why don't we update that, and then we'll tweak the view. And then finally, we're going to give it a ID that can be used for IDs or slugs or something like that. So this is where I can paste in that code from before. And let's just clean this up. And yeah, that looks good to me. So now if I were to die and dump the facets, and let's run Pint, come back, give it a refresh. All right, so we have our collection. Here is our facet. Here are the filters for each one. That seems right. So now, why don't we turn this back into an array? I don't think it matters too much, but I want to be very clear. So we have filters. Here's our items. That looks good. Okay, so now, if you think about it, when we return to our view, I no longer have to do this junk here. I can instead replace ID with filter ID. And then finally, we decided we didn't like value, did we? So we swapped that out with name, just to make it a little more clear. This should be the name of the filter. And I think that should do it. All right, so let's do our final check. And this is looking good to me. Filtering, this is all working. I can turn it on and off. This is looking great. And I know maybe this video was a little bit long-winded, and I'm sorry about that. But I think it's really important to go step by step so that you understand what each value does and why we're doing it in such a way, what this little thing means there and why we're doing it in that way. All right, so in the next section, let's take a break from faceting and instead focus on instant search. As I type here, I immediately want to see every 300 milliseconds or so, updated search results. How on earth do we do that? I'll show you how. All right, so let's do this. I want to take things up a notch and show you how to implement live search or instant search. And I'd also like to show you how we can, for example, bind to an input so that we can track the user's query. And we can also track which filters they've applied. And definitely, you can do this all with vanilla JavaScript, of course, but you're probably not. You're probably using a dedicated tool in real life, like React or Vue. So with that in mind, I'm going to set up a Vue and Inertia project. That should be pretty familiar to many of you. But keep in mind, it does take 5 or 6 minutes. So we have 2 choices here. Choice number 1, if you choose to accept it, is come along for the 5 minutes and just watch me install and configure Vue and Inertia and Vite. On the other hand, if you've done that a million times and you just don't care, all right, so I'm back on the Typesense website, and let's do this. Come along. Let's go to Guide, Search UI Components, and yeah, once again, we're going to take advantage of instantsearch.js. Now, keep in mind, this was initially developed by the Algolia team, but it's so popular and prominent that there is a Typesense-specific adapter that, of course, allows us to query against the Typesense index and API versus Algolia. All right, so I'm going to show you how to use that. Let's open up instantsearch.js, and if I scroll down, of course, we can choose our preferred framework. So again, I'm going to use Vue, but if you like React, then it's mostly the same, just a different syntax, of course. So let's take a look at Vue Instant Search, and if I scroll down, let's begin by pulling it in. So let's install Vue Instant Search. I'll paste that in. And now, of course, this is just the Vue specific version. So let's see this. Let's go to the dedicated documentation, down to installation, and let's see. Yeah, there we go. So, of course, we also want to pull in Algolia Search. So let's do that as well. npm install Algolia Search. All right, so finally, I can close that out just for now. And if I switch back to Typesense, they have an adapter. So I'm going to open this up, and we will pull in the adapter. So let's go to installation, and here we go. In our case, I think we can get away with just this one right here. And I'll paste that in. All right, and I think we're all configured. So let's do this. Let's switch back to the Typesense website. And yeah, if I scroll down, let's see a general approach. Yeah, this is what we want. So above here, this is how you would normally interact with instant search, but we're using Typesense here. So we pull in the Typesense search adapter instead. So we instantiate it, we pass through our API key, exact same stuff we were doing on the server side. We can specify what are we querying by, what are we looking in, what qualifies as something we are searching. So far, we're just using title and authors. And then we have our search client, and we can instantiate it. All right, so it's very, very simple once you understand what's going on here. All right, let's get going. I'm going to copy all of this right here, and let's switch to my editor. All right, so let's start within our routes file for a quick refresher. And yeah, it looks like we have a search endpoint. We read the query string. We build up our search params. We search the books database effectively, or collection. We compile the results, and we send them to a search/index view. So if I open this up, yeah, here's the code we have from the last episode where we bound to an input, and then we manually submitted AJAX requests to update the search. And by the way, this works great. If this is fine for your needs, stick with it. No need to pull in a package if you're happy with what you have here. But yeah, if you need a little more power, a little more flexibility, if you want access to all of these widgets, then this probably isn't the way to go. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of this and replace it with what I just copied from the Typesense website. And actually, you know what? I don't think we need this right now, so I'm going to comment that out temporarily. Okay, so let's do a little cleanup. We are just going to query by the title only. That's what we've been doing so far. And then let's set up our API key. And again, this is pretty much exactly what we were doing on the server side. So don't forget, this will be different for production. So you will likely want to reach for some kind of environment variable so that you can use one value for production and another value for local development. Okay, and your bundler will help with that. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Now I want to build up our UI. And because we've pulled in that Vue Instant Search package, we have these custom components, they call them widgets, that we can use. So here's what we'll do. Let's register it by going into our app.js entry point, and I will import Instant Search from Vue Instant Search, and we're using Vue 3. Okay, so now I can use that as a Vue global plugin, like this. Cool. So now if I switch back, check it out. I can say Algolia Instant Search, and this is sort of our wrapper component to get everything rolling. And yeah, in this case, the index name is books. That's the collection. That's the index we are working with. And notice for search client, we're not going to use Algolia here. We're going to use the Typesense adapters search client. So if we leave it like this and we have a look in the browser, notice we don't really see anything, but it's a little misleading. Let's open up our DOM here, and sure enough, we can see the gears are moving. So we do have a div with a class of AIS Instant Search. So now let's add another widget, maybe a search box. All right, let's expand this. And they will all have the same prefix, AIS. So I want a search box. All right, switch back, give it a refresh. Now we have a search box. And of course, all the bindings are in place here. So you'll notice if I open up the network tab and I hit a letter here, sure enough, it makes a query. So if I say foo and we open this up, we can see effectively what's going on now. We are making a request to Typesense. We're going to use the multi-search endpoint. It sends through the API key. And as part of the payload, we have the search here. So this is the collection, or the index in this case. What are we querying by? What is the query itself? All of that is prepared for you automatically, which is the big win here. So if we take a look at the results right here, again, exactly what we were seeing on the server side, because it is the same thing. It's the response from an API call. So sure enough, we have our hits, and here's all of the books that somehow match foo. Let's take a look at the highlighting. 11 thumps and the gateway to foo. Okay, so it is in fact working, which is really cool. All right, so now I'd like to see some search results. So let's do that. All right, so let's have our hits, which again maps up with that key from the API response. All right, so how do we want each item to appear? Well, here's what we can do. To start, I'm just going to spit out the items so you can view it for yourself. Come back to Chrome. And yeah, there's a lot to see here, but sure enough, it's the JSON response, right? So notice we have if you can see it, there we go. We have an item object within that first item, so item.item. So let's do this instead. Let's destructure it and fetch it out of that object. So now if I scroll up, we just have that top level, as you can see here. All right, and this is everything we'd expect. So if we want to grab the title, then we could say item.title. All right, and it seems to be working. If I look for dark, sure enough, it works great. And even better, I don't have to figure this stuff out. I don't have to decide, well, what's a performant way to perform these requests? Do I debounce? If so, how many milliseconds? It's all done for me, which is really cool. But now I would like to see highlighting like we had before. So we have a custom component for that. Let's swap this out with Algolia Instance Search Highlights. So the attribute name, that's effectively what field are we going to highlight? Well, the title, of course. And then finally, what is the hit? Well, the hit is the current item in our loop here. So let's bind to that, and that should do it. Come back, give it a refresh. Let's look for Harry, and sure enough, we're getting highlighting just like we did before, and it only took a single component, which is really cool. All right, so now to wrap up, check this out. This is really cool. We have access to all sorts of widgets that we can pull in. So if we take a look at the documentation for Vue Instant Search, in the menu, we can come down to the section for, Widget Showcase. And I'm already on that page. And yeah, you can see all of these different widgets you can pull in very easily. So yeah, what might we want? Let's go to Stats. So let's take a look at how we might use that. And we pull in AIS Stats. And we can provide some class names if we want. It's pretty seamless. So let's apply it. Come back and maybe right down here at the bottom, or maybe better after the search box, we could say AIS stats. That's it. Come back to Chrome, give it a refresh, and now we can see how many results are available and how long it took to perform the search. Search for Mockingbird, and we now have 2 results. Found in 0 milliseconds, instantaneous, which is kind of fun. We can clear that out. It all just works, and we don't have to manually implement this, which is great. Okay, so now let's do this. Let's return the facets in the next episode and figure out how we can use instant search to display each facet and allow the user to refine their search query. I'll show you that in the next episode. So here you can see we have an incredibly simple and unstyled search UI, but it does in fact work, which is great. Okay, now I want to take things to the next level. Let me show you how. First up, we can get some basic styling for free. I'm going to have a look for instantsearch.css, and this is an optional package that comes with Algolia and is perfectly set up to style those Algolia Instant Search components. So let's go down to Instant Search, and you'll see we have 2 themes to choose from, Algolia and Satellite. And if I scroll down, where are you? Where's the installation? Here it is. We can, of course, install it through NPM. So let's do that now. So I will paste that in, and we'll give it just a second, and then I will start up my Vite server again. And now let's do 2 things. First up, let's go to our routes file. And yeah, a few episodes ago when we were setting up server-side based search, we were reading the query string, building the params, and performing the search. But Instant Search is going to trigger those API calls for us automatically, which means I don't even need this, which is really cool. I can leave it just like this, which is great. And let's get rid of the client import. Whoop. One more time. Floppy. All right, let's keep going. So now I'm going to return to search/index. And let's do 2 things. First up, Typesense Instant Search Adapter. I don't know. I don't really like that. Let's just stick with adapter. A little bit cleaner. Okay, next I'm going to pull in that instantsearch.css file. And yeah, even though it's CSS, I can just import it directly here, and it'll be bundled and referenced properly. So import instantsearch.css, and you'll see we have a themes directory along with we have the full versions and the minified versions, but really just 2 themes to choose from. Let's have a look at algoliamin.css. Okay, so if we have a look in the browser, yeah, you see what I mean? We get some styling for free. So as a quick refresher, if we were to comment that out, this was the default, and all we have to do is import that file, and it looks a little better, and we don't have to focus on it too much, which is great. But I would like to see a little more spacing in between each of these components. So here's what I'm going to do. If I scroll down, I can add a class name here, and of course that'll just be applied to the top level wrapper div. So I'd like to use Tailwind here, so I can do things like space y2 to add a little space in between each. But of course right now it's not going to work because I haven't referenced Tailwind. So yeah, let's just do this. Rather than taking 5 minutes or so to officially install Tailwind and configure it and set it up with our Vite server, let's just reference it on a CDN. It's good enough for a demo. Okay, so let's go to my entry point, and yeah, right up here, I'm going to reference Tailwind through its CDN, which is cdn.tailwindcss.com. So now I get access to all of the default classes for free, which is cool. So now if I save this and I switch back, you'll see we do have some space in between each of these, which is good. But now everything, of course, stretches to the edges of the window. So maybe while we're here, let's just add some default padding, like px 8 on the left and right, and maybe a little on the top. All right, so that'll just push it away from the edges a little bit, and I think this looks good. Okay, so now, for example, if we were to search for Taylor Otwell's favorite book, well, this is working, and this is good, but notice I see Twilight 4 times, which is confusing. And of course, in real life, these would be clickable. It would take you to, for example, the book details page, but right now, I don't know the difference between these. So let's do this. Let's switch back to my view, and right down here, let's do this. Let's wrap this within an H3, like so, and that way I can give it a class of font bold. So if I come back and refresh, all right, now I see that. Next, I'd like to know the author or authors of the book. So let's do this. I never know what to put here, to be honest, in terms of markup. A paragraph tag, that's probably not right. Span feels weird. Even div feels weird, but sometimes I'll just do that because I can't think of something more appropriate. Anyways, within here, I'm going to use, once again, our highlight component. So I will just copy that, and we're going to highlight the authors. All right, come back, give it a refresh, and now I can see who wrote it there, which is great. Okay, next up, maybe the publish year. So maybe we could do something like this. We could say like authors, and then we could reference it like so. And then we'll do another one, and this will be publish date, maybe something like that. Now, in this case, we would never have highlighting for a date because we're not querying against that. So instead, I can simply just echo it out. So what do we want here? And remember, if you ever forget, just do something like this. Maybe right here within pre-tags, or tags, just spit out the item, switch back, and have a look. And let's expand this so we can see it a little better. All right, so yeah, still a little messy, but it's good enough for our needs. So yeah, I can see we have the authors, and I also want the publication year. Okay, let's switch back. So now we can get rid of the pre-tag, and we will reference the item's publication year. And yeah, I think that should do it. So now if I switch back, sure enough, if I search for Twilight again this time, all right, now we have a little more feedback here. All right, this is the famous one, and this is another one. Here's another one by Aaron Hunter. This is very helpful, which is great. Okay, so now I'd like to add some faceting into the mix. Let me show you how. First, if I switch back, let's get rid of this superfluous search heading. Yeah, just a little bit cleaner. Okay. All right, so now here's what I'm thinking. The search box, the stats, and the hits, that's basically the main content, and I want that displayed to the right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap all of this within a div, like so, and then I will have a sidebar, effectively, for all of the various facets, right? So now what I could do is maybe wrap all of this within a wrapper div, like this, reformat, and this will be our grid container, of course. So I could say grid calls 12, and we can say for the sidebar, this would be call span 3, and 3 plus 9 is 12, so this one can be call span 9. It's not responsive, but it's good enough for a demo. All right, let's have a look in the browser. All right, and yeah, this is close to what we're talking about here. So we have our sidebar section to the left and our main content to the right. But still, I think it's a little bit wide, so why don't we do this? On our wrapper div, let's set a maximum width. Maybe way up here, we'll say maximum width, and yeah, this is arbitrary. Maybe 6XL, and then we will set the margins to auto. So now if I come back and refresh, yeah, you know what? I don't have much real estate here. Yeah, maybe something like that. That'll do, pig. Okay, so now let's work on our facets. And here's the cool thing. It's just kind of automatic. If we make use of it, it's going to work, and I'll show you how. So let's get rid of our heading. And yeah, in the last episode, when we pulled in this package, we gained access to all of these various instance search components, right? And one of them is called refinement list. And yeah, this is just their name for faceting or categories. So the attribute, which one do we want to do here? Authors, right? So let's say attribute is authors. All right, so check this out. If I now switch back to the browser, there we go. It just works. With one line of code, we can now filter by the author. Let's give it a shot. Once again, Taylor Otwell's favorite book, and then this is the one we care about, and it further filters it down. We don't have to implement that logic manually, which is really cool. Okay, but I do see maybe some of the default styling isn't great here. So let's do this. Let's inspect the element, and maybe once again, we can sort of fake it. So it looks like we have a label that wraps the checkbox and then the author name and then the count. Yeah, so once again, I'm just going to add a little gap in between them, maybe like this. Let's just add some manual CSS at the bottom here. So I will reference that class and say display flex and maybe gap 2. Rems, but that's probably too much, isn't it? So let's do 0.5 rems. Basically, a little space in between the checkbox and the label, and then the label and the count. Close this out, refresh. Yeah, and now we have a little spacing, but maybe I'd like some padding as well. So maybe on the top and bottom, we'll do, I don't know, very little, maybe 0.1 rems and then 0 on the left and right. And this is good enough for my needs. Okay, now typically, we would want this in a panel of sorts. We might want a heading. And as it turns out, there is a panel component we could reference. So I could do something like this, AIS panel. And I'm not sure if they have styling for this, but it gives you some consistent class names that you can then reference, which is cool. So if I give this a refresh, yeah, we're not going to see any difference here. However, if we scroll up, you can see it does create this div with a class of panel body. Now, as part of this, we can also reference things like headings. So let's see. Yeah, right here. So if we have a slot for header, then we can spit that out right here. Okay, let's do that now. So within our panel, we're going to have a slot for our header, and we'll say authors. And in fact, let's just put that all on its own line. All right, so if I come back and refresh, yeah, now we have a little section there, which is great. Now, you'll notice that this line is going all the way to the edge, and that's because we created a grid, but we didn't have any gap in between. So once again, this is arbitrary for now. I'm just adding a gap of 8, and that looks good. Okay, so if nothing else, this is pretty amazing. Most of our energy in this video is just basic CSS, but the actual functionality you almost get for free. And it's so awesome that we have a Typesense adapter so that we could use it with Algolia, but we can just as easily use it with Typesense. So let's look for dark matter, and it instantly filters everything down to what we want. This is exactly what we want. All right, so let's finish up by doing one more. Maybe I'm searching for something like wizard, but I'm not sure who wrote it, but I have a general idea of when it was written. So maybe we could add a facet for the publication year. Let's see how. Let's come back, and I'll show you 2 steps. We could do something like this. Publication year. But, well, if I come back and refresh, that's not going to do what we want. Let's inspect and have a look. We can see could not find a facet field named publication year in the schema. And that makes sense, right? When we defined the schema, I didn't set the publication year as a facet. Now, if you think about it, even if we did, we would just have a massive list of years. If we search for something generic like there's a book with the in the title in every single year, so it's not very useful. So instead, I'd like to have more of like a range, more of like a numbered range. Books between 1950 to 1970 or 1980 to 2000. You get the idea. So in those cases, here's what we can do instead. So I'm going to reference Algolia Instance Search numeric menu in this case. All right, so check this out. Let's reverse these. The attribute, of course, is publication year, but the items is going to be, or are going to be, an array that we build up on our own. So for example, if I did something like this, if we start with label all and I don't specify a range, well, it's going to give me all, right? It's going to give me everything. So if I switch back, sure enough, we have this, but we have the same situation again where there's no space in between them. So let's see how we might clean this up. If we hover over it, we have our aside, and it's split into these panels, right? So maybe once again on the aside itself, why don't we just say space Y4, something like that, just to give a little breathing room. And that's good enough for me. Okay, let's add another one here. So let's do this. Why don't we do 2000s to begin? So our label will be anything 2000 to now. All right, so our start will be the year 2000. And that's all we have to do in this case. Come back and refresh. And now if I filter it down to books released in the 2000s, yeah, this is what we want. We're not going to find any book released in the 50s or something like this. So notice I'm searching for clearly Wizard of Oz. And you can see whatever is here is not the original book. But if I switch back, here we go. That's the one we would normally expect. That was in 1900. Very cool. Okay, so let's do a little more. What about things like 1980 to 2000? All right, well, now we could say 1980, but we also need an end date as well. So with that in mind, we would do maybe to 1999 since the next one is up here at 2000. All right, end is 1999. And then let's just do one more. I think you get the basic idea. 1900 to 1979. In real life, maybe you'd expand this a little more, but this is good enough. And we're losing any books in the 1800s as well, but you get the idea. Yeah, so let's switch back. Here's books in the 2000s, books in the 80s, books before that time, which is great. So now, yeah, actually, just one more. If you want to handle all of the old books, if you want, just for fun, you could say ancient books. And in this case, we're not going to specify a start date. We're just going to specify an end date. So in this case, it would be the year before the previous start, which would be 1899. So the ancient books, yeah, of course, this is going to give you Pride and Prejudice and The Little Women. And of course, don't call it ancient. You're going to get people mad, but you get the idea. Very cool. Let's look for Shakespeare books. And this is in 1595. Very cool. You get the idea. All right, so here's the thing. Notice this entire video was mostly just writing kind of a cheap CSS. The actual implementation is wild. All we had to do is just add this single refinement list component. And notice, if I scroll up, I didn't have to be explicit about adding facet by like we might have done on the server side a few episodes ago. The presence of this component is enough for it to know, oh, okay, you're trying to facet. So let's just make sure that we update the API call to take that into account, which is really cool. And the same is going to be true for numeric menus and things like this. It really is incredible. And trust me, if you were just writing this out by hand, it would take you a very long time. All right, tell me what you think. Otherwise, onward in the next episode. All right, so let's take some time to talk about ranking just a little bit more, just to be sure that you fully grasp everything that's going on behind the scenes, okay? So let's do this. Once again, I'm going to search for Taylor Otwell's favorite book, Twilight. And you'll see that the first 4 results are all called Twilight. But of course, different authors, different release dates, different stories, but the same name. All right, so in these situations, we basically need a tiebreaker, right? Or in other words, how do we determine among these 4 what the sort order should be, right? How do we know that this one by Stephanie Meyer should come up first? Well, we can guess just as humans, we know, well, that's the popular one, right? That's the one that Taylor read. So that one should come first on the list because it's the most popular. And as it turns out, that's what's going on here, right? All right, so here's what's going on behind the scenes. First up, it's going to take into account your text match. So if I search for foobar, of course, Twilight is not going to come up at all because there's no match. So of course, that is first and foremost the most important thing. All right, next up, if you declared a default sorting order when you defined your schema, and we did, hint, hint, then that will be taken into account. So our default sorting order, I believe, was ratings count, or maybe average rate. I can't remember which one we did. Maybe ratings count. So basically what that means is, okay, well, if you have a tie, and in this case we have a 4-way tie for text match, they're all perfectly named Twilight. It's not Twilight at the end of a sentence, it is the single word, so it gets the highest text match score. So in these cases, we need a tiebreaker. How do we determine which of these 4 comes first? Well, we declared ratings count. So it's going to say, okay, the book that has the most ratings, or maybe the highest average rating, if you declared that, well, that one should come first. And that would make sense, right? For books, if I'm looking for Twilight, I'm probably looking for the popular one rather than, and I don't know these other ones, but maybe if nobody read these, that's probably not the one you're looking for. So let's make sure we take popularity into account. Now, otherwise, if there is no default sorting order, it will just use like the document ID, so recency. The one that was inserted, the document that was inserted into your index most recently would come up first by default. That's the way it works. But of course, you have full control here, right? You can override these to your heart's content, and I'll show you how. All right, so let's open up our view. And yeah, right at the top where we declare our search parameters, I'm going to add sort by. And again, notice it's the same as what we were doing within our Laravel controller on the server side. It's the same thing. So if I want to override how we sort, then I use sort by. But here's what I want to do. I want you to see this side by side so that you immediately see the difference. So let's do this. Let's pull up our browser. And instantly we see it's not super responsive. So let's do this really, really quick. We'll say maybe for extra large devices, we will use a 2-column grid. Otherwise, let's just do call span 12. And then right here, same thing. Call span 12 or call span full. Okay, so now if I scroll down, still not great, but we have a little more real estate to work with. Great. Okay, next up, let's scroll up. And once again, I want to simulate searching for Twilight, but I don't want to have to manually type that in over and over each time we change our code. So here's what I'm going to do. I will scroll down to our search box, and I'm going to use vModel on this, and we'll call it search query. And then if I scroll up right here, we will define search query equal to a view ref. So now notice if I were to just set a default search query of Twilight, it instantly shows up even when we refresh the page. So yeah, as you can imagine, if you want to set the initial value of the input equal to, for example, what's in the query string, you could do that using vModel. Okay, this is just a little time saver for us to play around. All right, so once again, I see that the default sorting order is what you would naturally expect. Stephanie Meyer's book comes up first. But now we're going to tweak this. Let's say sort by is going to be, and I'm going to use this special string, text match. Just think of that not as an actual field, but instead sort of like a magic symbol that represents the score for the text match, right? Well, what was the score? We're going to sort that so that the highest matching score comes up first. So we'll say in descending order. Okay, so yeah, now we see it's a little bit different. This Aaron Hunter book is coming up first because we basically deleted the default sorting order. We said, no, we're not dealing with ratings count right now. I just want you to sort exclusively by text match. So now, okay, well, still though, why did this one come up before Stephanie Meyer's? Well, likely because then it falls back to the document insertion order. So in this case, this one probably was inserted later than this one, and we can see that represented by the release year. Great. Okay, now let's take it a little further. What if instead we deleted this and said, well, let's sort by the publication year in descending order. Now if I save it and I scroll down, it's going to be a little bit different, right? So you'll notice now the fact that Twilight as a single word got the highest score, we're not taking that into account. It's still factored in, as you can see here, but we are sorting according to the release year. So that is taking priority. That's a good way to think of it. We are giving priority to the publication year. So this one from 2011, this graphic novel, is coming up before the actual book that Taylor Otwell read. Okay. So what you could do is combine these. You could say, well, let's start with the text match score. So let's do that one first. But then if there is a tie, I also want to specify what the tiebreaker should be. So let's save this, scroll down. All right, here's what we have. Notice Aaron Hunter is first. But then if there's a tie, and in this case, there was a 4-way tie, these likely have the exact highest score. So if the score is the same, we move on to the tiebreaker round, right? And now we're going to say, okay, give precedence to the publication year. And if I save this now, you can see the most recently published one is coming up first. But if I were to reverse that and say, no, we're going to do the old ones first, if I scroll down, in that case, we start with the text match, and then for a tiebreaker, we switch to the oldest book comes first, which likely doesn't make any sense, but just as an example. Okay, so as it turns out, we can have a third tiebreaker, and this will often be the case. You start with a text match, and then maybe you sort by something else, and then if there happens to be a tie again, what is the final tiebreaker round? Okay. Maybe what you might do in real life is say, all right, well, let's start with a text match, but then we're going to switch over to ratings counts. That's really important. If a book has 30,000 ratings, then it's going to be, by default, more popular than the book that has 12 ratings, right? So if I save this now, if we scroll down, yes, so we have our matches here, but then we switch over to ratings count. And yeah, like I said, very possibly ratings count was the default sorting order, which is why we get the same result. But once again, if we wanted to see like, okay, let's take the least reviewed book, and that one's going to come up first for some reason. Then we can see among the books called Twilight, this one seems to be the least popular. Okay, cool. So yeah, here's maybe what you might want to do in real life is say, okay, let's go by text match, and then I'm going to consider ratings count. And very likely you will, and this is important by the way, very likely there won't be a tiebreaker because ratings count could be 12 or 25,324, right? The likelihood that two books are called Twilight and have that ratings count, that same ratings count is very, very low, which means you would never go to the third round. But in situations where you do, well, maybe what should be the final sorting order? Maybe at that point, we give a little weight to the publication year. That might make sense. If the match is the same and they have the exact same ratings count, which is not very likely, then maybe let's give precedence to the publication year. You're probably, if you're searching for it in 2025, you're more likely to want to find the more recent book than the older book. That might be reasonable to consider. All right, you get the idea. So here's the thing for you to remember. If you add something like this and you notice like, hey, I add the third tiebreaker, but there's no difference. It's always the exact same results. This is a really common thing to run into. And the answer very likely is because once again, for your tiebreaker, there was no second tie, so you never move on to the third round. So I'm going to give you an example using the Laracasts website. Let's switch over now. So if I go to the search page and we search for inertia, why don't you hit pause and just imagine if you were building this, how would you determine what the sort order should be for programming courses at Laracasts? And your first thought might be, well, just keep it simple. Whatever is the best match for inertia should come up first, right? But actually, that's probably not what you want if you really think about it. What if the best match for inertia is a course that is literally titled Inertia? But the only problem is it was released in 2015 and it focused on the beta version of Inertia. Well, in that case, even though the text match score is the highest, it's not the one you want, right? If in this case, this focuses on Inertia 2. This was released more recently. The score maybe isn't as high, but it's the better result for you. So these are things you have to take into account for your own website. Don't just assume that the best text match is going to be the best result for the user. Other things need to be taken into account. So I'll tell you specifically for Laracasts, here's exactly what we do. We consider the text match score, but then we move on not to like ratings or views, because once again, an Inertia course that was released in 2016 that got so many views back in the day, still is probably not the one you're actually interested in. If we refresh that course in 2024 and it doesn't have as many views, that refresh course is still the better one to provide to you. All right, so once again, we take the text match score into account, but then next, we give a lot of weight to the release year. All right, so here's something I want you to remember for your own projects. I don't just set the created at timestamp as the tiebreaker, because that timestamp is going to be unique and there can be no third tiebreaker at that point. No two courses are going to share the same timestamp. So if that's okay for you, then fine, but just keep in mind there's never going to be a third tiebreaker. You're going to sort by text match score, and then you're going to give the highest weight to the most recently created course. And maybe that's okay for you, but it wasn't for us. So what I decided is, okay, I want to consider the match. I want to consider the year the course was published in. And then if we have two Inertia courses that were published in the same year, Well, for the tiebreaker, at that point, yeah, let's favor the one that has more views. All right, so that's our tiebreaker. Text match followed by the release year. And in that case, we could have many courses that were released in 2024 or 2023. And at that point, there are many courses that could tie when it comes to the release year. So for the third tiebreaker at that point, we give weight to views. Whichever one is more popular at that point should come up first. All right, so now I'm going to leave you with a little cliffhanger for the next episode. If I instead search for Laravel, notice that 30 Days to Learn Laravel comes up first. However, based upon the sort order I just told you about, which was text match followed by release year followed by popularity, well, based on that algorithm or that sort order, this one would not come up first. However, this is a really important course at Laracasts, and I want it to come up first. If you are new to Laravel, this is your entry point to the framework and Laracasts, and I want it to come up first. Okay, so now we can see there are situations where you basically want to override your sort order. There might be situations where you want to boost or promote a particular course or a particular book. Maybe even if it's just paid by the publisher or the author, that's something you could offer to your clients. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the next episode. All right, welcome back. Now let's move on to overrides. This is pretty cool. So let's invent a little scenario here just for fun and for the example. Notice that this book right here, this is The Global Phenomenon that Taylor Otwell read. But this other one from Aaron Hunter was released just a year after. It was probably a coincidence. Aaron Hunter didn't know that this book right here was going to become the gigantic one. It's just a coincidence that they share the same title, probably. So let's imagine that Aaron Hunter is a little annoyed, or her publisher is annoyed, and they are willing to pay in order to boost this book to the top of our result set, right? So they contact us and say, hey, we'll give you X amount of dollars. Just make sure when somebody searches for Twilight, our book comes up first. Now, from my angle, it's probably a bad business decision to allow this, but maybe it happens all the time. So what would we do in this case? Well, we're going to take their money and we're going to boost this to the top of the list, and I'll show you how. So let's open up our routes file. And once again, I'm going to do this as like a playground route. In real life, you probably wouldn't do that. You might have an artisan command. You might have a little script that you run, or you might have developed a full dashboard UI to make it easy for non-developers to add these sorts of overrides. Very likely that's what you would do in real life. But nonetheless, a simple route will get us going. Okay, so I'm going to call this playground. And yeah, here, I'm basically going to say, all right, what are the parameters for this override? What am I targeting? Well, I'm going to target, let's do this. Target a query for Twilight exactly. Okay, what should we do in that case? Well, we should bump the document with the relevant ID to the top, all right? So we're going to have to figure out what the ID is. And you know what? Why don't we do that right now? Let's go into our view, and right down here, here's our hits. Yeah, just very quickly, let's spit out the item's ID. That will be our identifier. Okay, back to the browser. Give it a refresh, and now if I scroll down, okay, this is the one we want. So the version of Twilight with an ID of 8354 is the one we want to boost to the top. Great. Back to our routes file. 8354. All right, let's get going. So let's generate our override. So we'll have two keys here. We'll have our rule, which is what are you targeting? And then we'll have our includes, which means, well, what are we doing here? Are we moving this particular document to a certain position? Well, yes, we are. So we would add that here. All right, so our rule is that the query is for Twilight. Next, the match is, well, are you looking for any query that contains Twilight, or does the query itself have to be exactly Twilight? And this just depends, and you can factor this into the UI you build if that's something you do. In our case, we're saying, no, this rule only takes effect if you search exactly or precisely for Twilight. All right, next for includes, what are we going to do here? Well, I'm going to say, on that condition, let's find the record with an ID of 8354, and I'm going to move that to position number 1. All All right, so it takes into account your default sorting order, and then it reads the overrides and it makes any final adjustments. And in this case, it's going to basically pluck that less popular version of Twilight, and it's going to move it to position number 1. All right, so now we just have to insert this into our collection. So like we've done before, let's reference our Typesense client, and then I can say, let's reformat this. There we go. So let's say client collections. We are working with the books collection, and I'm going to add an override. And I can use this upsert method. If you're not familiar with upsert, think of it like insert or update if it already has been inserted. If there already is a record, then update it. All right, let's give it a key, anything you want. Promote, Twilight, sponsorship, whatever convention you want. And then we reference our override. And that's it. So when I hit this route, we declare an override that will promote any search for Twilight. And it's going to grab this less popular book and push it to the top because they paid us for that service. So now we have the override, and we will insert that as part of the collection. And I'll say override created. If I can type properly. Okay, let's run this in the browser and then refresh our search results. All right, so before we hit that playground route, I want to remind you that Aaron Hunter's book is currently in position 3, and they want it in position 1. So let's hit the route, playground, and it fails. Inclusion ID must be a string. Okay, this is something to remember. Whenever you're working with Typesense, when you declare your schema or anything like this, ID must always be represented as a string. And in this case, I used an integer, of course. So it's an easy fix. Reference it as a string. And don't forget, when you create your schema, and if it's based on an Eloquent model, we'll make sure that Eloquent model's ID is cast to a string as well before you send it to Typesense. Okay, back to the browser. There we go. Override created. So now if I return to search, you're going to see, dun, 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 Aaron Hunter's version of Twilight is promoted to the top result. And they paid us well for that privilege. Okay, and that's it. So as you can imagine, you could store things like this within your database. You could have the overrides as JSON. You could build a little UI around it. And also, if you need to delete these things, you could say overrides, reference the key like so, and then you would call delete. And that would delete it. Override, deleted. All right, back to the browser one more time. Playground. All right, it's gone. Back to search. And once again, the sponsorship deal has ended. The money is gone. So they return to position number 3. Tell me what you think. All right, let's move on. So this is overdue, but it's time to check out Laravel Scout. So as you see here in the documentation, Scout provides a simple driver-based solution for adding full-text search to your Eloquent models. Okay, so by driver-based, here's what that basically means. It offers a single API, but you can swap out the underlying search engine, which is really cool. So maybe you're using the database driver, but then you want to switch over to Typesense. You can still stick with that Scout API and just swap out the underlying config. It's really cool. It's sort of an implementation of the manager pattern, if you're familiar with that. Okay, so let's pull it in. First, we need to require it through Composer and then publish the configuration file. Run that, and I'll come back, copy the publish command, and now you'll see we have a new config/scout.php file. Let's have a look. All right, so here's our project, and sure enough, we have a config/scout file. All right, so there's a lot to take a look at here, but to start, the two things I want you to be aware of are the Scout driver environment variable as well as Scout queue. So yeah, like I said, Scout is driver-based. You got to pick which service you want to use. And here are the supported options, or you can even build your own if you want. But of course, in our case, we care about Typesense, so that's the one I want. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to copy this environment variable, switch over to my env file, and I'm going to be explicit that we are using Typesense here. Okay, so now if I switch back, if I scroll down, we can specify whether or not we want to use a queue when we are syncing these operations. And we're performing adding a record and then having that sync with the Typesense index or doing a bulk import. So just now, maybe in production, you might want to turn that on. For local development, I will declare it and just set it to false as a reminder that for production, maybe I should set that to true. All right, so this is looking good. So now, think about it. We have installed Laravel Scout. We have configured it. Let's go ahead and whip up some dummy data so that we can perform a query. So from the terminal, let's do this. Let's create the concept of a course. So I'm going to make a model called course, and I'm going to have it generate all of the companion files. Really too many. We're not going to use some of these requests. But yeah, we at least get the eloquent model, we get a factory, we get a migration, and we get a seeder if we need it. All right, so let's start within our migration. Create courses table. And like I said, very, very simple. We'll say a course consists of a name. A course consists of a description, and then also I want something to be faceted. So maybe let's say a course has a category. Now, yeah, in real life, category would probably be its own table, right? You'd have a categories table and then a foreign key that points to the related category. But I don't know, let's just keep it simple. We're going to have a simple string field here. And then finally, why don't we say a course belongs to a user? So I could say a foreign ID for a user. And yeah, that's good enough for me. So now let's go ahead and run our migration. PHP artisan migrate. There we go, looking good. Okay, so now we need some dummy data, right? So what I can do is very quickly go into our course factory. And yeah, very quickly, let's see if AI can do this for us. Yeah, let's see what it gave us. So name, let's make this a sentence. Description is a sentence. There is no duration or price. Let's do user. So the course's user ID will be a user factory. And then finally, a category. Let's just choose a random element. Yeah, something like this. A random element, and we will use programming courses like frameworks, tooling, languages, and techniques. So it'll pick one of those categories. And that looks good to me. So now let's generate maybe 500 records in the database. That way I can boot up Tinker, and we can say app, models, course, factory, 500, create. All right, and now we have 500 records that we can play around with. And notice that each of them is assigned its own unique category, which is great. Okay, so now, as you can imagine, I want to import these into Typesense. So here's how we do that. Let's return to config/scouts, because as you'll see, this is where we declare our schema, just like you learned at the beginning of this course. So I'm going to scroll down, and you'll see some search engine-specific configuration, like if you're using Algolia or this option. But in our case, we're using Typesense, and notice this looks very familiar, right? It's the same thing. Declare your API key, declare your nodes. We did all of this, right? But now if I scroll down, we have our model settings. And notice this is where we declare the schema for each of our eloquent models, which is really cool. And they even give us something to get going. So let's uncomment this. And what I usually do is, well, first, I reformat it. But then I simply swap it out with my model. That way I have somewhere to get started, or I have a shortcut to get started. All right, so for a course, the collection schema, and I can declare all of our fields. Again, this is exactly what we were doing at the beginning of the course. So if we were to do this, let's imagine what we want to sync up. Well, we want to give it an ID, and notice your ID must always be a string. So if you manually are specifying your searchable fields, which we will do later, you want to make sure you cast your primary key to a string. That's important. All right, next, a course has a name, which is a string. A course has a description, which is a string. It has a timestamp. Again, for timestamps, stick with int64. And then finally, we're going to sync up the user ID and the category. So I'll do user ID here, but you could also, if you wanted to facet by usernames or something like that, then of course, keep in mind that your Typesense schema does not have to perfectly line up or sync up with your database structure, right? If you want to dynamically calculate something and send that up to your Typesense collection, you can totally do that, okay? So it's not a one-to-one link. All right, so user ID with that in mind is going to be int32 is fine. And then finally, I'm going to do the category itself. category is a string. And remember, it makes sense that we facet by category, right? Show me all courses that are in the frameworks category. So let's be explicit that we want to facet. Okay, so this is a key thing to remember. For any eloquent model that you want to be indexed or converted into a Typesense collection, you have to declare the schema within your config/scout file. Okay, so now we're about ready, but one more thing. Let's go into our course model, and I'm going to use searchable. So this is a specific trait that Laravel is going to use that allows you to, of course, make any record or any collection of records searchable. And by searchable, that just means synced up with Typesense. Okay, very cool. All right, and then finally, I'm going to declare this method toSearchable_array. Think of this as our way of converting the eloquent model into the necessary schema or the fields for our Typesense collection. So again, let's see if AI can help us. ID, not quite AI. Remember, we want this to be a string, so I will cast it to a string. We have the name, we have the description, we have created at. Let's also say the user ID will be, and I'm just going to, for now, hard code the user ID. Let's clean that up. And then what else did we have? The category. So the category, again, is just that hard-coded string. Okay, so yeah, this is our way of converting the course eloquent model into the necessary document that will be synchronized with Typesense. We're all set to go. I hope I didn't make a mistake. Let's give it a shot. Now, if I run PHP Artisan, because we installed Scout, you'll see that we have a handful of new Artisan commands. But really, Scout Flush and Scout Import are the main ones that you should memorize. Scout Import, of course, will receive an eloquent model. It'll fetch all of the records and literally import them into your Typesense collection. Scout Flush, of course, will clear it out. And you would reference this if, for example, you need to update your Typesense schema. If you add some new records, if you change things, flush it out and re-import all of the records from scratch. Okay, so in our case, we want to say PHP Artisan, Scout, Import, and I'm going to give it our eloquent model. App, models, course. All right, we cross our fingers, and of course, it fails immediately. Let's have a look together. All right, field created at must be, oh yes, of course, I'm very sorry about this. Field created at must be an int64, but right now, I believe we gave it like a carbon instance. So this is actually a good thing to run into together. Right down here, whenever you are including a timestamp with your Typesense collection or document, make sure that you call timestamp on it. Timestamp. Okay, so now let's cross our fingers, and I think it should work this time, and it does. So sure enough, we imported 500 records into Typesense. It's working. Okay, so now let's wrap up this video by performing our first search, and then in the next video, I'll show you how all of this works, how to add records, remove records, update records, all of that stuff. So let's go into our routes file, and yeah, check this out. Course, and I'm going to say search, and let's just search for foobar, and give me the results. It's as simple as that. And remember, you have access to this search method specifically because we imported the searchable trait. Okay, so, and actually, let's put this on its own line. All right, so let's run this in the browser and see what we get. So if I load the search endpoint, we get nothing, probably because, yeah, we forgot to return it. Always return the data that you want to see in the browser. All right, so in this case, we get nothing at all. So what does this mean? Well, it means there were no matches. And because there's no matches, well, we get an empty collection effectively. All right, so let's do this instead. Let's open up Table Plus. All right, let's open up the courses table, and I will grab some word that I do not know the name of because I'm dumb. Okay, so let's go back to PHP Storm. We will now search for that, and this time, if I give it a refresh, we do have results. So sure enough, we can see every single record contains that word as you see here. Now, you might be wondering, well, how did it know to search through the name? Well, take a look at this. If I go back into config/scout, you'll see that for our course model settings, right down here, the default query by is set to name. So in your case, if you wanted it to be description instead, you could update this. And something to be aware of is this is the default. And of course, if you need to, you can override it. But in many situations, yeah, you will always have a default query by. Here's the things I'm actually interested in searching. If you search for a course name, maybe you don't need to include the timestamp with that. Okay, so back to the browser, and now if I give it a refresh, we will get different results. This time, results where the description contains that word. Okay, so I think we're making pretty good progress here. There's a lot to talk about still, so I will see you in the next episode. All right, welcome back. So now in this video, let's get comfortable. So once again, I'm going to run course search, and I will use a star to represent anything, and I'll get the results and return them as JSON. All right, have a look in the browser. And yeah, like we saw at the conclusion of the last video, we get our results, but in this case, because I used a star for the search query, we are effectively searching everything, right? So in this case, it'll fall back to the default sorting mechanism, which in this case would be insertion order. So that's why we get the most recently created record first, and then it works its way down. Okay, very cool. But now take a look at this. If I instead just simply run DD on this and we take a look at what's actually being returned, we get an eloquent collection that consists of items, but notice that each item itself is a course instance. And this is really cool, right? So before, when we were manually working with the client, we would get that response and then we would have to manually go through the hits and pluck out the information we need. But in this case, Scout is converting it back into the appropriate course models or instances, which is really cool. So we have access to all of this data, which is great. Okay, but take a look at this now. If we swap out get with raw, yeah, as you might expect, this will now give us the raw Typesense response rather than converting it back into eloquent instances. So now if I give it a refresh, yeah, this is going to look very familiar to you at this point. So now we can dive into the hits like we did before. If we are using highlighting, we could get it this way. We could go into the document, we could read the information that we want, which is great. So now imagine we want to search for this word, whatever that word happens to mean, but I want to limit it. I want to filter it down to only the courses that were created by this user with an ID of 500. I'll show you how to do that with Scout. First, let's save this to courses. We will get the results, and then we will return the results as JSON. Okay, so now all we have to do is insert our query. Yeah, and once again, we have our results, but notice that each course was created by a different user. So imagine you want to filter things down. You want to effectively say, give me only the courses that were created by this particular user. Those are the ones I care about, right? All right, well, we can use this where method here. Now, be a little careful. I know this looks like the same where that you would use when performing eloquent queries against a relational database. It's not the same, right? Typesense is not your relational database. So with that in mind, just remember it's very primitive support. You're not going to do really fancy stuff. You can do simple number and string-based checks. So for example, if I wanted to say, all right, search all courses for this keyword, but filter them down to only the ones where the user ID is 500. Yeah, once again, this is something you could do. So if I come back and give this a refresh, in this case, the way we set up our seeding, every course belongs to a unique user, so we get exactly one response. But sure enough, it is working, which is great. Okay, so now maybe we want to say, all right, well, search for this keyword, but I only care about the courses where the category is set to languages. So yeah, once again, if you wanted to implement your own filtering system, this would be a simple way to do it. Once again, we get only courses that include that keyword, but also have a category of languages. That's great. Next. So if we come back to our query, check this out. If we turn it back into star, once again, that just means everything, right? But now we're saying, well, give me everything, but filter it down to only the ones where the category is languages, right? So again, this is a nice way if you just want to click on a category and then see all of the matching results. You could use star for that, and that would be fine, right? You could do all of this through Typesense. But of course, the real power is when you are performing queries. Now, we can also paginate our results using Scout. So once again, the API is going to be very similar to what you're used to when working with Eloquent, and that's intentional. I just want to remind you that when you call paginate here, you're not calling the same method as when you normally do something like this, right? And that's because when you call this search method, you're actually getting a Scout-specific builder, and that's how everything can be prepared for Typesense, right? So when I call paginate here, notice that I actually have a Scout builder class that once again will take care of it in the same way we would normally expect, but the implementation and the way it goes about doing that is a little bit different. Mostly you don't need to worry about that though, and that's the great thing about Scout and how it integrates with Laravel. You can use the knowledge you already have and it's just going to work, which is great. All right, so let's bring that back to get. And yeah, if we wanted to reproduce what we had originally, here's what we might do. We don't need this variable. We will return the results. And let's put these on their own line. And we'll say search, and we're going to look in the request for Q, but I will default to star there. Okay, so now if I give it a refresh once again, let's search for this word here. And I'll just manually add it as the query string. And now we once again get only the results where, I think that was the one I copied, where that word is referenced, which is really cool. All right, so now that you understand the basics of querying with Scout, in the next episode, we need to figure out, okay, well, how do we add new records into our index? Or if I update a table, how do I then ensure that it gets synchronized with your Typesense collection? Or if I delete something, I need to make sure it gets deleted. Or what about situations where maybe certain courses should not be searchable? How do we allow for that? Well, I'm going to show you it all in the next episode. All right, so check this out. This is pretty cool. Here I have our courses table pulled up, and sure enough, we have 501 dummy records. Watch this. I'm going to run PHP Artisan Tinker, and we'll say app models course factory create, and let's create one where the name is some course. Okay, so now if I come back to Table Plus and I give this a refresh, and yep, we see our new record, and we'd expect as much, right? But now here's the cool part. If we come back to PHP Storm, and once again, let's say course, let's search for the word course and get the results, and I will return that as JSON. Now watch. We get our results, and sure enough, I see some course. All right, so that's really cool, right? Think about what's happening there. We ran an Eloquent query to insert a record into our database, but behind the scenes, it just automatically figured out that, okay, you're inserting a record, you're saving a record. Let's make sure that we also synchronize it with a corresponding document within your course's Typesense collection. Say that 3 times fast. It's really cool. It just happens for you for free. And again, it's happening because within our course model, we used the searchable trait. And yeah, it's basically going to register an observer. Let's see if we can find it real quick together. Yeah, something like this. It's going to listen for when a record is saved or created or updated, and it's going to figure out, well, is this the sort of model that should be searchable? More on that in just a minute. If it's not, then let's make it unsearchable. Otherwise, we're going to call this searchable method, which ultimately synchronizes it with Typesense. Okay, so though, what if we don't handle this through Eloquent? Because if we don't do it through Eloquent, then we don't get an Eloquent event. And if we don't have an Eloquent event, then none of this logic is going to fire, right? So for example, imagine that we just duplicate this. How do I do it? Copy, paste. There we go. Another some course. Oh, what did I do wrong? Unique. Oh, yeah. Let's give it a new primary key. Okay, so now if we scroll back up, we have 2 courses that include the keyword course. But of course, now I created the record manually, right? So that means no event was dispatched, which means if I give this a refresh, Typesense doesn't know anything about this. So these are the sorts of things that you need to keep in mind, right? If you have some kind of system where you are manually inserting records or they're getting imported from a SQL file or something like that, you need to have logic that will manually import these records. So you do have some options here. Of course, you can write your own script. You can run Scout import, but also here's something you could do. If I run PHP Artisan Tinker, yeah, if you have one-off cases like this, here's something you could do. This course has an ID of 501. So let's say app models course finds the one with an ID of 501. Yep. And yeah, if we wanted to, we could just manually call that searchable method. And that's it. So that synchronizes it. So now if I give it a refresh, you will see that, oh, I'm sorry, that's not right. We want the one with an ID of 502. You saw that and you're thinking, Jeff, this is not going to work the way you think. Okay, now if we synchronize number 502, you'll see, okay, now Typesense is aware of that record. And that's what you want to, that's something you want to think about, okay? It's an easy trap to fall into. And yeah, the same thing's going to be true. Like sometimes, you know, if you're a solopreneur, if that's a word, sometimes Tables is your CMS, right? So maybe you update it here, some great, amazing course. You just update it directly there. But then when a user searches your website, they're going to see the old version, right? So they're going to see, okay. I need to clarify something. So yes, in this case, it's going to work because once we found a matching result for course, then Scout is going to fetch the corresponding records from your actual database and display the results. So that is fair. However, if we look for great, here's my point. Let's go into PHP Storm, back to our routes file. And if we instead search for great, now you're going to see we don't get anything. So that's what I was trying to demonstrate to you. We manually updated this record, and this just happens to be the only record that has the word great in it. But because we did it manually, it didn't get synchronized with Typesense. So at no point did we update that document, which means now if the user were to search for great, as we're doing here, they're not going to get any results, even though they should. That's my point. Okay. So once again, you could track down the corresponding record. So in this case, find 501. And if we call searchable, that will do effectively the same thing as you can see there. Okay, good to know. Okay, next though, let's imagine, well, this course did not pan out and we're just going to delete it from our database entirely. So notice if I were to track down that record and I call delete, once again, through model events, Scout's going to pick up on that. So now if I come back to Table Plus, that record is gone, no 501. And also, it's smart enough to know, okay, we need to remove this record from Typesense. So if we search for great once again, we're not going to get any results, which is cool. And yeah, once again, I think you get the basic idea. Let's look for the record with an ID of 502, and we're going to update it. So we'll say, let's clean this up. Let's update the name to be blah, blah, blah. All right, so we give this a run and Eloquent's gonna try to fight me. Okay, what's happening here is it's protecting me against mass assignment vulnerabilities, even though I don't need it. That's okay, we'll just do it manually. Course name equals blah, 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 as my daughter says to me. All right, so if I save it, that will, of course, update the record on our database end. But once again, through that model event, it will synchronize it. You already guessed this was going to happen. So let's look for blah. Actually, this might pick up more than one thing. It does. But sure enough, among those search results is the updated course, which is really cool. All right, so now let's wrap up by discussing how we can effectively opt out of certain records being imported into Typesense. So here's what we'll do. Let's go into our database folder, into migrations, into the migration for a courses table. And let's add a new one now. Let's say table Boolean, and this will determine whether or not the course has been archived. And by default, it has not been archived. Okay, so let's repopulate everything and then update our schema. Back to the terminal, I'm going to run a migrate fresh. And then once again, if we open up Tinker, I will say very quickly, give me 500 courses. All right, that's done. So now let's go back into our schema. So config/scout. We have changed the schema for a course. So this is a good review of how you would go about updating things. And yeah, if I scroll down to Typesense, here we go. We're going to add a new field. Right down here. This one is going to be called archived, and it is of type Boolean. All right. And then finally, if I return to our course model, let's just declare that we are now tracking the archived status, at least right now. So I can say this, archived. All right, that's done. So now let's run scout flush. So I'm going to clear out all of the records. So app models course. All right, and then I will import them. Okay. So now, yeah, if we once again open up our database .sqlite file, and I go into courses, let's say for this most recently created course here, I'm going to set it to archived. So yeah, if we do that, yeah, ideally, when the user searches for any portion of this, it should not be included in the results set. It's effectively not searchable at that point. So once again, if you want, you could have scheduled jobs or something like that where you say, run a query, find all records where archived is set to true. And for each of those, call unsearchable. So you do something like this. You'd say app models course where archived is true, and you could say unsearchable. So yeah, if you wanted to set that up as a console command or a scheduled job, you could do that. But another way is just say, look, if it's archived, it should never be imported in the first place. So here's what you can do. Back to PHP Storm, let's go into our course model, and we're going to add this method. Let's do it right up here. Should be searchable. So yeah, if we just did something like this, where we return false, what do you think is going to happen? Well, let's give it a shot, in fact. Let's say PHP Artisan Scout Flush. So we're going to clear everything out. App models course. All right. Now, if I run import, let's see how many records get imported. The answer is 0. And that's specifically because, well, for every single record, it's calling this method. Is this something that we should make searchable? And remember, whenever you see that word searchable in the context of Scout, that means, is it something that should be searchable with Typesense, right? And in this case, for every single record, we returned no. So if I were to go to the routes file and say, just for a visual for you, let's look for everything. Well, if we load this in the browser, we're going to get nothing because there are no records to return. So that's something to be aware of. All right, so yeah, in this case, here's what we could say. Well, look, if this record is, if this course is archived, or rather, if it is not archived, then yes, it should be searchable. If it is archived, on the other hand, then it should not be searchable. Okay, so once again, let's do this. Let's flush everything, re-import from scratch. And yeah, here's what we're going to see. Let's come back to Arc, and we're going to get all of the records except the one that was archived. So if we were to search for this, archived equals 1, no, we're not going to see anything at all because it wasn't included there. All right, so very good work. Think about it. Now you've learned that when you use Eloquent to create or update or delete a record, well, of course, Eloquent model events will be dispatched, and Scout hooks into those. And that's how it's able to synchronize those changes with Typesense. And it happens automatically. You don't even have to think about it, which is really cool. However, you can also manually make records searchable. If you track down a model, you can call searchable or unsearchable. Or you could do it directly off of a collection, which is really cool as well. Scout uses these macros to hook into existing collections to basically extend the API, which is kind of fun. And then finally, you learned that if you want to exclude certain records from being searchable, then you can override the should be searchable method on your Eloquent model. Okay, so in the next episode, let's just take a few minutes to talk about advanced customization and how you might go about doing that. All right, so now let's quickly touch upon how we can drop down a level, so to speak, when we need to apply advanced configuration options directly to the Typesense engine. I'll show you how. So here you can see we are searching courses, and let's look for this keyword. We fetch the results, and then we compile the results into an eloquent collection. If I switch to the browser, this is what we get, right? Okay, but now let's imagine that, well, I want to search directly for the category in this case. We're going to allow you to search for a category rather than the name or the description. All right, in that case, let's set the category to languages, but yeah, if I were to come back and give this a refresh, we're not going to get any results because we're not looking in the category. That's not one of our default fields. So in these situations, you have two choices. First up, with Typesense, there is an options method we could call. So in this case, I could say query by, and then we provide the fields, just like before. So in this case, we're going to query by the category in this case. All right, and now we get all matching results just as long as each course is under the languages category, which is great. All right, so this is good, but real quick, just as an aside, if you're just trying to do a simple where clause, don't forget there's a where method that Scout provides. So what we could do here is change this out with where. I could say search for whatever it is we're looking for, but we could say limit it to only the languages category. Those are the only ones that I care about. So now we effectively get the exact same thing. And yeah, that's definitely something to be aware of, and it's probably how I would do it in this case. But yeah, in our case, I want to talk a little bit more about this options method. All right, so you'll remember at the beginning of the course, we reviewed search parameters, right? It was an array where we specified things like query by. We learned about filter by, right? We learned about highlighting. Lots of different things, right? That search parameters array that we learned about, that's exactly what you have here. It's the same thing. So in situations where you need to kind of drop down and really configure how these things are constructed, you can do so. So for example, maybe in this case, you want to query by the description only, and that's not the default. Then you could do it like so. Now, if I come back and give it a refresh, well, if we were to search for, how about this word here? Now I'm going to get results only where the description includes that word, which is here and here. All right. If we want to do multiple fields, like maybe we're going to search through the description as well as the category, then you could do that as well. So that's going to give you some results, but also if we look for a dedicated category name, that would show up in the search results as well. Languages, languages, languages. So yeah, you can make this as flexible as you need to. Cool. Let's say you need to filter the results. And again, you need to really drop down a level to have more fine-grained control. You could say filter by. And then once again, if we were to reproduce what we had before, if we want to say, well, give me the ones where the category is equal to, how about tooling in this case? You've already learned the syntax for this, right? It's the field name followed by a colon, followed by the operator, followed by the value, right? We've learned this many times. So once again, this is available to you. Now I'm going to get only the results, in this case, that are under the tooling category. Or again, if we want to look for results that were created in the last 2 months, again, you could specify all of this here. Okay, and again, if you need a little refresher, go back to the lesson where we discussed filters. Cool. Now, in addition to the options method, which I think most of the time is probably going to satisfy what you need, you can also pass a second argument to the search method. So this really allows you to dig down. It's going to give you, in this case, access to the Typesense documents instance. So I'll just call this Typesense. It's going to give you the query you're searching for, and then it's also going to, once again, give you that options array. So if I were to just die and dump all of these for you to review, let's have a look. Anyways, we have our documents instance, then we have our query itself, and then finally the search parameters array or options. And yeah, this is a great place to see what are the default parameters that are being included as part of my query, right? So we can see Q. That's everything, and that's being pulled dynamically through that search method. What are we querying by? Well, the name by default, and that is being, of course, specified within your config/scout file. If I go down to Typesense, into our model settings, there we go. What are we querying by default? Just the name. But if I were to change this to description, now it's going to use the description field to build up that parameters list. And you can see that updated here. Next, do we have any filter bys? No. Per page, 250. How do I configure that? Well, again, you can treat it just like an eloquent query. So imagine you are performing a query against your database and you only want to take 20 results. Same thing. So it's a different method, it's different underlying logic, but the API is the same, which is really cool. You just interacted with the way you're already comfortable interacting with Eloquent. So now if I come back and give it a refresh, now we've updated this and we're only getting 20 per page. Next, what if we want to configure things like this on the fly? Once again, maybe instead of mark tags, we want a span with a class of highlight. Well, you can do that here. So I'll show you. So let's say options or search parameters, highlight, start tag. And you know what? I bet AI can figure this out for us. There it is. Span with a class of highlight. And I bet it'll figure out the next part. Amazing, right? So now we have tweaked the options. The final step is to perform the search. And keep in mind, whenever you use this second argument approach, make sure you return the search results. So you would say return, give me the Typesense collection instance, perform the search, and send through the search parameters. Okay, let's have a look. Yep, we get our results like usual. Let's make it a little more clear. Let's look for this word, come back, refresh. And now we're only going to find where this word is included within the description. But yeah, now how about, what about the highlighting? I want highlighting, but I just have a model instance now, right? I don't have a result from Typesense. So how do you deal with situations like that? Well, sometimes you might need to tweak it in two ways. You might need to say, well, give me the results, but then also give me the raw results. So in these situations, you could say, not get, but raw. Give me the raw response from Typesense. Come back, give it a refresh, and notice now it's not going to wrap it up into Eloquent model instances within a collection. You get the raw results. So yeah, once again, you would have access to your highlights and you would interact with it in the same way as you did before. Or what I would probably do is map over these, and maybe I would build up a new search results PHP class where I just send through whatever I want. Yeah, be creative. Do what feels natural to you. In this case, though, do notice that we have a span tag with a class of highlight rather than the default mark tags. If I were to comment this out, they will return to mark tags as we see right here. Cool. But yeah, I would imagine that in most situations, well, you probably don't need this second argument unless you really need to drop down and calculate some stuff. Otherwise, most of the time, you're just setting search parameters, to be honest. And in those cases, you have a dedicated method for that. Provide your search parameters here, and you're all set to go. Even for things like maybe a vector query. And hint, hint, I'll show you how to do that in an episode or two. You could provide that here. You could say, this is my vector query, and then you provide your embedding. Let's format, and yeah, that would be how you would handle this. So I'm going to wrap up by showing you where all the search parameters are listed. Have a look. Of course, if we visit the Typesense documentation, you want to go to API/search, and you'll see a section for all of the search parameters. And yeah, query by, prefix, again, most of these you won't use, but there's vector query that you could reach for. You can even do a voice query. There's so much fun stuff to play around with. Okay, so I think that does it. In the next episode, let's move on. All right, welcome to a new chapter. We're now going to move on to semantic search. But I'll warn you, I think at least initially, this can be a little overwhelming because there's a lot of new concepts and terms and keywords to be aware of. But don't worry, I'm going to simplify this as best as I can. All right, so first up, what is semantic search? Well, think of it like this. It allows you to fetch results that are conceptually related to your query, even if your actual query doesn't show up in the document itself. And here's what I mean. I'll give you an example. Let's say you search for dog. All right, well, traditionally, with a traditional approach, it's going to scan your collection and find any references to dog, right? And if dog shows up, it gets included in the result set. However, if one of these documents refers to how to take care of your pet, well, very possibly you would want that document included as well, but it's simply not going to happen, right? Dog does not equal pet, so it's not included. All right, that's a shame. Here's another example. Let's say you search for car. Well, once again, it's going to fetch any documents that reference a car, but I don't know. What if a document, and remember, document is record in your database. That's the parallel. Anyways, what if one of these records references automobiles? Well, that probably is a match, right? I'm searching for car. If there's a reference to automobile, that should be included. But again, traditionally, it's not, because car does not equal automobile. So wouldn't it be cool, though, if there was a way to match the vibe of what I'm searching for rather than the exact sequence of characters, right? The general vibe of my query is just things related to cars. And yes, that would include automobiles. Yes, that would include anything else you can think of that would be related to that term. So we can allow for that through semantic search, and I'm going to show you how. Now, to allow for this, we effectively need to convert the relevant portion of our document into what's known as an embedding. An embedding is just a numeric representation of that document. Or, I bet you've seen this before, it's an array of floating point numbers, a very long array of floating point numbers, all right? And here's the cool thing. You don't need to know what those numbers do. Trust me, you don't. But what you do need to know is, once again, that embedding is a numeric equivalent or representation of the document. All right, so this is where it gets kind of cool. What if we also converted your search query, dog, into an embedding as well? Well, now we have an embedding for the query, and we have an embedding for the documents. Could we then write a mathematical equation to compare how close they are to one another? And yes, we can. This is known as cosine similarity. So the way it works is, it's almost like geography. If they are conceptually related, they will be closer to one another. And by the way, machine learning and LLMs will construct these embeddings in such a way so that if they are conceptually related, they are closer to one another. Okay? If they are not conceptually related, if they have totally different vibes, if maybe your query is love, but all your documents are about PHP, maybe that distance is going to be quite high. All right, so again, that's something to be aware of. With cosine similarity, a smaller number means closer, and closer means closer together, more related. All right, let's write some code. Let's begin within config/scout, and here is the schema for our course. And yeah, if you think about it, we would need an embedding for this document, and it would probably make sense to include the name and description along with that. Okay, so we have two ways to handle this. The first option is the manual approach. You would maybe have an artisan command. You would loop over your courses, and for each one, you would concatenate the course name and the description, and you would fire off an API request to something like OpenAI. And you would say, hey, here's a string, convert this into the embedding. All right, OpenAI will do that. It'll return it as a response. You then save it to your courses table or pivot table, or just sync it up with Typesense. Okay, so now on the Typesense end, for each document, you would have the course name, the course description, and the course embedding, which again is a numeric representation of the name and description. All right, so if you took that approach, you would need to set up this field. We would call it embedding. The type, remember we said, was an array of floating point numbers. So let's do floats. You need to decide, could there be situations where a course does not have an embedding? Very possibly. So I might set this to true. And then finally, we should specify the number of dimensions. Just think of that sort of like the number of items within that embedding array. Of course, the more items you have, well, the more targeted you can be, the more context you have, but also it's just much more data. So you'll need to research this on your own to figure out what the correct number might be. Maybe it's 256, maybe you want 1536 as you have here. That's what I use, but yeah, just research that a little bit on your own. All right, so yeah, this is what you would do. You now have a new field within your schema. You would generate those embeddings, and then you would sync those up. However, there's a second option that is much easier. Typesense can just do the work for us, which I really like. We can set up a local model, and we can instruct it that, hey, we need to make sure that for this schema, we always have an embedding that consists of the concatenated name and description. And yeah, you don't have to do any of that work at all, which is really cool. And that's the approach we're going to take. Okay, let's get started. So to start from scratch, once again, we would create a new field where the name is embedding. The type is an array of floating point numbers. But this is where we branch off a little bit. Check this out. We'll say embed. And where is this coming from? Well, what fields are we going to reach for? Well, like I said, we're going to use name and description. And when I have more than one, like I said, it's just going to be concatenated. Okay, so we're creating an embedding from or using the name and the description. Next, I need to specify the model config because as you can imagine, there's lots of different models and they're constructed in different ways and some are more efficient than others. It really just depends and you have to do a decent amount of research to figure out what model you want. If you use OpenAI for everything, of course, you can use a third-party model, but you can also use a local one that gets downloaded by Typesense, and that's what we're going to use here. Okay, so have a look here, and you can see a long list of supported models. Like I said, nobody expects you to know all of these. Just do some research to figure out what your use case is and which one might be the best fit. But yeah, maybe we'll use this one at the top for brevity. So we can just copy that, and that is our model name. Alternatively, if you're using OpenAI, then you might want to reach for the text embedding 3 small model. That's the common one at the time of this recording. So if you wanted to take that approach, yeah, you would specify the model name, and that would be text embedding 3 small, and then you would also need to generate an API key through your OpenAI dashboard, and then reference that, maybe something like this, OpenAI key, and that should do the trick. But like I said, we're just going to use a model that gets automatically downloaded by Typesense. So I can do Typesense / in that model we referenced, and that should do it, believe it or not. Okay, so now what have we specified here? We specified that whenever a new document is created or updated, an embedding is going to be generated, and it's going to use the name and description fields concatenated together. All right, so now I think we're all set to go. Let's try this out in the terminal. So we've changed our schema, right? So we should run scout flush on app models course. Great. Next, we should re-import. But now check this out. If I were to run PHP Artisan Tinker, let's say app models course factory create, and the course name will be all about Typesense. You get the typos for free. Okay, so now think about it. That took just a tiny bit longer, right? And that's because as part of that, we also generated the embedding and it got synchronized with Typesense. So check this out. We're going to run a curl command. Let's see if I can find it. Pretty close. Not quite, though. We want to hit the Typesense port 8108 /collection/courses, and then we're going to search through the documents. So let's set the query to star for now. And yeah, here are the results. Here's the insides of that index. So sure enough, we can see a record where the course name is all about Typesense. And check it out. You have a massive numeric representation of the course name and description. How cool is that? And it was done automatically for you. Look, I'm still going here. There we go. We finally get to the embedding. Okay, so now think about it. We can perform a search. We can accept that query from the user. We convert the query into an embedding, and then we compare them. And again, we don't have to do it ourselves. We can just have Typesense do it for us, which is the best part. All right, let's get going. All right, back to my editor. Let's return to our routes file, and you're going to love this. Let's say return course, and let's do it one step at a time. We're going to search for Typesense, that was included in the course name, and we will fetch the results. Okay, so no semantic search going on here, just traditional search. It gets compiled into a collection of relevant courses, and we return it as JSON. So if I look in the browser, oh, we get nothing. And you know what I bet that is? Let's go back to our Scout file. Ah, yes. When we were playing around, I must have set the default query by to description. Let's query by name or name and description if you want. Okay, back to Chrome, give it a refresh. And sure enough, this is basic search. We know how to do this. It returns this result, which is great. Okay, but yeah, now if I were to look for maybe search engine, something like that, well, come back to Chrome. Typesense does not equal search engine, so it doesn't get included in the results. So now let's switch over to a semantic search. And here's the best thing. All I need to do is override how we are querying. So instead of querying by the course name, we're going to query by the embedding. And here, again, here's the best part. Notice that at no point did I convert search engine into an embedding myself. That's going to happen automatically by Typesense. Okay, so if I were to come back one more time and give it a refresh, it's ridiculous. I mean, I've done this for a while, and it still kind of blows my mind that this all just works. It's ridiculous. It's so cool. We search for search engine. Okay. Behind the scenes, search engine gets converted into an embedding, and then we check the nearest neighbor. We check the cosine similarity against all of the embeddings for each of the courses, and the ones that are closer matches, right? Or better matches. But it's not entirely clear to me, right? So for example, let's do this. Let's just read from the request. All right. And let's once again send through Taylor Otwell's favorite book. And notice we look for Twilight, or he's searching for Twilight for his second read, and yet it still returns Typesense, okay? And this can be a little confusing. I guarantee this is going to be confusing. Why do I search for Twilight, but I see Typesense? Well, there's a couple reasons. First up, Typesense is the only record that we have in our index currently. And second, it doesn't know like which items to be included or which items to not be included. It just knows how close they are to one another. So I'm going to make this a little more clear by changing this from get, which gets us a collection of courses, and I'm going to switch it to raw, which gives us the raw response. All right, and now there's two things I want you to be aware of. First up, notice that for each course or each document in the response is also the embedding. I want to remind you just how massive this is. And this is just one course embedding. If I have 100 results, then I would have this times 100. And it's just not necessary. I'm not going to do anything with it. So as a general good practice, exclude the embedding from your search results. And you do that via your search params. You could say exclude fields, and I will reference the embedding. There we go, and now it's gone. Yeah, there's no point in paying the cost of that payload if you're not going to do anything with it. Okay, so next up, point your attention here, vector distance. Again, this is the cosine similarity. This is the distance between your search query and the course embedding here. And it's going to be somewhere around 0 to 2. Here it is 0.95. So once again, the lower that number, the lower the distance, the closer the match. So let's do this. Let's create a couple more records. PHP Artisan Tinker. And I will do another one. We'll say Laravel Techniques. All right. We'll do another one. That is the Love Doctor. And we'll do another one, something totally unrelated. Dogs and cat training or something like that. Okay, so now we have a bunch of courses. However, here's one thing to be aware of. The description is included as part of the schema, right? And because we have gibberish here, our score may not be quite accurate, right? Because maybe some of this is getting reused. So with that in mind, here's what I think I would actually like to do. Back to PHP Storm, into config/scout, and let's say the embedding is just going to consist of the name here, okay? That's the only thing I care about currently. Just remember, in real life, you probably would want that description included. All right, so once again, we flush, and then we import. All right, back to Chrome. We give it a refresh, and now we have a bunch more results. So we are currently searching for Typesense, and sure enough, that's going to be the top results. Notice the vector distance is now much smaller, again, because we're not including that gibberish text. But if we close this out, here's the next result, and the vector distance is 0.88, 0.9294. So notice it goes up. So again, the smaller the distance, the closer the match, which is why this one, of course, is going to be the best match. Let's instead search for dog. And of course, that one's going to be included. But we're doing semantic search here, so we could also do pets, and that one gets included. How about teaching pets? Yep, and notice, even though, again, my search query is not included here, it's checking the general vibe, the concept of what you're searching for. And of course, this is going to be a match. And notice the vector distance is quite low. Whereas if I scroll down, the least match is going to be something very technical, like Laravel techniques. All right, and that does it. So I get it. This is so much to take in, at least initially. Suddenly you're learning about semantic search and vectors and cosine similarity and numeric representation and vector distance. It's just a lot, right? But hopefully you now understand the basic approach. If you ever want to perform a search based upon the general vibe of the user's query rather than the exact sequence of characters they type in, then you want to reach for semantic search. And again, you do that by converting their query into an embedding, and then you compare that against the embeddings that are stored within, in this case, the courses table. And the ones that are closer are just naturally going to be better matches. So here's where I'm going to leave you all with. Notice there's no real logic that determines whether or not one is included or one is excluded. Instead, it's just ordered by the vector distance. So notice if I were to search for gibberish, right, I would still see matching records. And again, that's because it's still a match. It's just a match with a very large vector distance. So that is something to be aware of. Okay, I will see you in the next video. All right, so now let's wrap up this course with a review of Typesense Cloud. All right, so yeah, as it says here on the tin, Typesense Cloud is effectively the hosted version of Typesense. So yeah, imagine if in production you just want to hand over the workload related to provisioning the server, installing Typesense, configuring it properly, handling scalability issues and concerns, dealing with failover, providing a dashboard to your non-developers so that they can review all of your indices and documents. Maybe they need to create their own collections or custom analytics. If you just want to hand over all of that work, which is immense, by the way, in that case, Typesense Cloud is an incredible solution. Let me show you how to use it. Let's begin by signing up with GitHub. Great, nice and quick. Let's set up our cluster. And of course, configure these options according to your organization's needs. I don't have to say that to you. Okay, but a quick little note here related to memory. If you're wondering what to select here, well, you can start with 0.5 gigs, and that's nice because it's free for the first 720 hours. However, just keep in mind, a warning, if you're going to leverage embeddings like we discussed in the previous episode, it's a lot of RAM. And with 0.5 gigs, you're almost certainly going to run into memory issues. So at minimum, again, if you're going to use embeddings, start with 2 gigs and then work your way up. But yeah, if you're testing, if you're playing around, if you're working with this course, you can start with 0.5. Okay, everything else can be configured according to your needs. All right, so let's go ahead and launch it. Okay, and we're in. So now it's configuring and initializing our cluster. It'll take just 4 to 6 minutes. So through the magic of screencasting, let's skip over that. All right, we're all set to go. So now let's generate our API keys and store them as usual within our Laravel apps environment file. So generate API keys, and that will download them here. All right, and if we open that, we can see our admin API key, our search-only API key, which, by the way, you would use in your JavaScript front ends, and then finally, our host. All right, so let's copy this and switch over to PHP Storm. All right, let's open our env file and update these values. But first, a quick little note. Of course, if you want, you can still use Typesense locally and just reach for Typesense Cloud in your production environment. However, if you prefer, you could also use Cloud in a local and production environment. In those cases, just create 2 clusters. One cluster is for local, another cluster is for production only. And that way they don't interfere with one another, which you definitely don't want. Okay, so let's do this. For that file that we just downloaded, I will paste it temporarily here. Okay, so we have our admin API key. Of course, this is the private key that we don't expose to the world. And I'm going to delete this key when I'm done here. Okay, so I will paste that in. Next, we have a search-only API key. And yeah, this is what you would reach for in your front end if you're using instantsearch.js. And you just need a key that allows us to search our collections, but not create new ones. That's the key you would reach for. So yeah, just for now, let's create a new one, and I'll call it Typesense Search API key, and then we'll tweak that in just a minute. Okay, and then finally, the node, well, that is going to be our host. So let's paste that in. Okay, so finally, let's clear this out. Our port is going to be 443 because we are using HTTPS, and I think that should do it. Okay, so now check this out. If I switch back to my dashboard and we switch over to collections, of course, we don't have anything at the moment because we haven't imported our data. So let's do that now from the command line. PHP artisan scout import, and no change here. We're still importing our course, and we'll get that just a moment. All right, and that's done. So let's have a look in our dashboard now. There we go. Now we see all of our data in a nice dashboard UI. So yeah, here's our dummy little courses: dogs and cat training, Love Doctor, Laravel techniques, and all about Typesense with the typo included. And what's even nice is if I scroll down, we have search parameters, and we're already super comfortable with this, which is great. So let's say, yeah, you know what? I want to be able to facet by the category. So let's update this and then expand my browser. And if I scroll back up, yeah, now we see the familiar category facet. So it looks like we have 4 dummy categories here, one for pets, and that filters the data, which is great. Okay, so I'm feeling good about this. Why don't we test it out? So from the command line, I'm going to boot up Tinker, and we're going to find just the first course we see here. So app models course first, and let's see which one we get. All right, we get all about Typesense. Okay, let's go ahead and finally fix that typo or that capitalization issue. So I'm going to say course name equals, let's change it entirely, the Typesense course. Now I'm going to save it locally, and we've learned that it will automatically sync via eloquent model events that Scout hooks into. So that means if I switch back to our dashboard and maybe give this a quick refresh, let's see if it worked. Dog and cat training, Love Doctor, where are you? There we go. It has been synchronized. Perfect. This is exactly what we want. And sure enough, we can see the embedding, which, of course, they're not going to display all of. They definitely don't want to do that. Okay, this is looking good. We can perform searches. So let's say doctor, and of course, Love Doctor is going to come up first, and we can review all of the various scores. Okay, so now let's integrate this into our little instant search JS example. So back to my editor. Let's open our routes file. And yeah, I'm going to return that inertia view that we created a handful of episodes ago. I'll say inertia render search index. Okay, and if we open this up, yeah, you'll remember this is where we pulled in instant search JS. We instantiated our Typesense adapter, we configured it, and then we rendered the data. But you'll notice here, this is still set up for when we were working with the books collection. And now we are working with courses. So yeah, this is a cool opportunity to put our learning to the test and see if we can make everything work. Okay, let's do that now. First up, the server credentials. Ideally, I would love to not duplicate everything. For example, the API key. Yeah, I don't want to have to just say, well, let's go right here, let's copy that, let's paste that in. You can if you want, and it's fine. But instead, here's what we can do. If we're using Laravel and Laravel Vite, what I can do is prefix any of these values with Vite underscore, and then instantly it will be exposed to our front end. So yeah, what we might want to do is have 2 sets of values. So let's do this. Let's double these up, and then we will remove any that are not required. But yeah, notice if I were to say, let's say Typesense right here, and I precede them with Vite underscore, now these values will be available to me. So here's what we could do. I don't want my private key sent to the front end. I want the search key. So what I could do is take this search only API key and update it here. Okay, so now this version is the private key, and we could even add a note, private key, private admin key. And then this version down here is the search only key. All right, very cool. So now I can get rid of that value as well as this one. And now all of this data is safe to send to the front end. So now check this out. If I return to our view, we can access those values. And real quick, I'll show you as an alert by saying import.meta.env, and then I provide our value. So in this case, we want Vite Typesense API key. Let's do this. Let's boot up Vite and then load this in the browser. And sure enough, we get the value. It's working. Very cool. So switch back, and now let's update these. So once again, import.meta.env.vite Typesense API key. And then to save myself some time, I will replace these. Typesense host, Typesense port, and then finally Typesense protocol. Perfect. Okay, next for the search params, we are dealing with courses. So let's do this. Let's go back to our collection for courses, and let's have a look. A course consists of a name and a description. So let's reference those values here. To start, we're just going to query by the name only. Sort by, I will comment out, but you can tweak that how you need to. And then we'll scroll down and update these values. So I don't care about publication year. We don't have authors or a published date. We just have the name of the course. And then right at the top, let's configure that the index name that we are working with, of course, is called courses. And then finally, for faceting, we're going to do categories. And again, remember, just to drill this into you, category is coming from this value here. And that's available because when we declared it within config/scout, if I look for category, we declared that it should be treated as a facet. And so it is. Okay. So one more time, is this everything? Let's do our final review. Yeah, we instantiate it properly, query by the course's name. We reference the appropriate index name. We have a facet for categories. Actually, why don't we just call it category? And then we have a search box. This is all looking correct to me. So let's cross our fingers and have a look in the browser to see if it's working. And ta-da, it works. So we have our 4 ridiculously named courses. I can filter them using the category facet, frameworks, pets. I can't decide, do I want a dog course or a Laravel course? Which one do I need here? We have lightning fast search. Of course, we have typo tolerance out of the box. It's really amazing stuff. Okay, so now I want to finish up by showing you what you might research next. So heads up, this is the last episode in the course, but who knows, maybe in the future we'll have some bonus episodes that show you how you can take things even further with some examples. Okay, so let's do this. Come down to analytics rules. This is your homework. Check this out and research how you can leverage this in your own projects. So imagine 2 examples. Imagine you want to track the most popular queries, in this case, at Laracast.com. How would you do that? Well, couldn't we just listen for what the users search for and then store them in their own collection and track them? And then we could use that to provide feedback. Here are the popular searches. We can provide instant recommendations. That would be amazing, right? Or what if instead we wanted to track which search queries produce no results at all, as you see here? Well, that could be an indication that, hey, you need to develop this course because everyone's searching for it, but it's nowhere to be found on your site. And that's really cool. Okay, so very quickly, just to give you an idea of what you might want to do. If you want to track all of the popular queries, Well, you could call this popular queries rule, name it whatever you want. You declare the source. In this case, we're using courses as our source. And the destination would be, well, where are we going to deposit all of the data? Well, we need a special collection for that. So very quickly, let's create a new collection directly from the dashboard, like this. New collection. So let's call it popular queries. And if you're wondering, well, what fields do we require? Of course, you can check the documentation. You only need 2. So if we open the API reference for Typesense, let's scroll down to query suggestions and specifically how to create the rule. Yeah, this is what we want. We need 2 fields. So I will swipe that and paste it in right here. Okay, so we have one for Q. Of course, that's the query. That is a string. And then finally, the count to track how many people are searching for that. Okay, finally, we can get rid of these, and we have our custom collection for popular queries created through the dashboard. Okay, so now if we scroll back to our analytics, let's do it one more time. We're going to track popular queries. The source is going to be courses. The destination to track all of those popular queries will be its own collection. And let's limit it to the top 1,000 search results. And believe it or not, that's it. It's now going to begin tracking all of our searches. And just keep in mind, it's not in real time. So for example, if I were to say Laravel, and we immediately go back and check, well, maybe we'll see something, but I imagine it's queued up every 5 minutes or so. So let's go into our collection for popular queries. And yeah, I don't see anything yet, but let's do this. Let's search for a couple things. Let's go for doctor. All right. And then maybe one more, cat. And I'm going to snap my fingers and we're going to wait just a few minutes for this to populate. All right, and here we go. So I paused for just a few minutes, and now we can see that our popular queries collection is, well, populating. I can see searches for doctor, cat, and then finally Laravel. So of course, now you can use this internally to track what are my users interested in. But like any other collection, you can also expose this to your users so that they can see, here's some popular queries that folks are interested in. Maybe you would like to search for that as well. Okay, so that's going to do it for Typesense Cloud. Of course, there's so much more to this, but this will get you going. And then further, we're done with this course. It has been a massive investment on your part, and I really do appreciate you for sticking to the very end like you have. So that's going to do it, but you know what? If there are other things, if there are other examples you would like to see, let us know in the comments below, and maybe we'll come through. I'll see you later. Check this out.
Oh, what the? Let me show you.